Chapter 248. The first prince looked at Devitt and let out a few cold laughs. Suddenly, he turned his gaze toward Fong Xingjian and said, "Since you wish to continue, then let's continue. However, the regional champion has already been decided. I'll take Fong Xingjian away first. It won't be too late for me to take the rest of the people away after the rankings have been decided." In fact, the first prince had never intended to stop the regional selection. In fact, he had only rushed over after suddenly receiving news of Fong Xingjian's amazing performance over the past few days. He wanted to take him down before he became a conferred knight and officially joined the regional academy. Otherwise, if Fong Xingjian really became a conferred knight and entered the regional academy, it would be troublesome if he were to make a move. The regional academy had autonomy, and even the first prince would not be able to make a move easily. After Fong Xingjian completed his second transition, his abilities would obviously improve by leaps and bounds. When Fong Xingjian heard the first prince's words, he lifted his head and looked toward the sky with his eyes closed, as if he was really looking at the first prince. The first prince said calmly, "Let's go, Xingjian. As the royal family's supervising envoy, I have the right to choose the talents in this regional selection, unless you wish to go against my orders." Fong Xingjian pushed away the person supporting him, lifted his head, and looked in the direction of the first prince's voice. He suddenly asked, "George, what if I'm not willing to go?" When the first prince heard Fong Xingjian call out his name directly, he felt displeased. "How dare you? Is the first prince's name something you can call out?" The Dark Knight observed the first prince's expression and let out a cold snort. The dark canopy in the sky pressed down, as if it was going to attack Fong Xingjian. However, many ice dragons had already soared up into the sky, forming a barrier beneath the dark canopy. Governor Devitt said, "With the first prince's status, why must he make things difficult for a mere knight?" The first prince looked at Fong Xingjian from the corner of his eyes, not taking his words to heart. With his status, no matter how talented Fong Xingjian was, what right did he have to talk about rules and conditions with him? He directly ordered, "Take Fong Xingjian away." He was too lazy to talk about conditions and reason. But under the canopy of darkness, 3 more figures appeared behind Devitt. A hint of fury flashed in the first prince's eyes, and his tone became increasingly cold. "Do the few of you also wish to defy the Emperor's orders?" Devitt said calmly, "His Majesty said to let you select the elites to enter the center, but he didn't say that you can ignore the knight's wishes, right?" Since Fong Xingjian doesn't wish to go and wishes to stay in the regional academy, as the headmaster, I will naturally have to stand up for him. The first prince said coldly, "Fong Xingjian has yet to enter the regional academy and has not even gone through the second transition. He is not even a real conferred knight." Devitt said, "Fong Xingjian is the regional champion and has already attained heaven's perception. It's only a matter of time before he becomes a conferred knight and joins the regional academy. Doesn't the first prince know this?" The first prince did not say a word, but the black aura around him became increasingly obvious, as if bringing with it a deepness that came from hell. At this moment, as everyone looked at the first prince's clone, they all thought of the following words: "Deep as the ocean." The Dark Knight next to the first prince's clone was the national champion from 2 years ago. Right now, he was a level 29 pinnacle conferred knight, a powerful character who could go up against the governor or even be slightly better than him. If a person like this, with the first prince's Hell's clone supporting him, were to act recklessly, putting aside the governor and the other 3 examiners, it would be a natural disaster for the spectators and the entire regional academy. As the first prince's aura continued to soar, the pressure from the canopy of darkness also seemed to increase. Many people present could not help but slowly bend their backs, unable to continue raising their heads to look in the first prince's direction. Just then, Fong Xingjian straightened his body, and a mental cultivation method in his mind circulated crazily. His entire body let out kacha-kacha sounds. Enduring the pressure from the first prince and the Dark Knight, he said in a clear voice, "George, let me ask you this. In the arena of the regional selection, the victor is king. I'm the regional champion and a conferred knight. Joining the regional academy has been a rule since the founding of the country. Is there anything wrong with me not going to the National Academy with you? Each of Fang Xingjian's words were like a huge bell being struck, transmitted from his body and landing clearly in the ears of everyone present. Hearing his words, most of the people present turned pale. It was hard to imagine that someone would dare to speak to the first prince in such a manner. Is he crazy? To think that he dares to speak to the first prince in such a manner? Does this Fang Xingjian not want his life anymore? To think that a level 19 knight would dare to be so insolent to a level 29 expert at the pinnacle of the martial arts academy? Even examiners Luke, Yaris, the Forbidden Army's deputy commander Adri, Mongol's city lord, and Cursed city lord broke out in cold sweat when they heard Fang Xingjian's words. Who was the first prince? He was the strongest successor of the ancient path of hell in this generation, the future successor to the throne, and a conferred knight who was extremely close to becoming a divine-level conferred knight. Even a level 29 conferred knight would have to tremble in fear and tread carefully before him. To think that Fang Xingjian would dare talk back to him, he was extremely audacious. Governor Devitt and the others also became nervous, secretly putting up their guard, as if worried that the first prince would suddenly go berserk and kill someone. Oh, it was a simple word, but it seemed to make everyone's hair stand on end. The first prince lowered his head and finally looked at Fang Xingjian, as if he had not expected that Fang Xingjian would still dare to go against him under such pressure. However, when he thought of Fang Xingjian's earlier performance, he came to a realization. This Fang Xingjian was really unwilling to submit to the first prince and was hard to discipline. The first prince opened his mouth slightly, and an extremely domineering aura gushed forth. Fang Xingjian, you're just a knight, and yet you dare to talk about rules with me? As the Empire's first prince, the future king, and a level 29 conferred knight, I'm an expert who can step into the divine level at any time. I've conquered the 4 seas, intimidated the world, and have all the experts in the world in my hands. Do you think you're worthy of talking about rules with me? Since I'm here today, the rules of the entire regional selection will naturally be decided by me. At this moment, the first prince finally stopped feigning civility and completely revealed his attitude. It was to rely on absolute power to suppress and sweep through everything. He himself was the greatest rule. Hearing his words, the countenances of the 4 examiners, with Devitt in the lead, all changed. It was as if they had not expected that the first prince would shed all pretenses of cordiality. However, the first thing they felt was not anger, but fear. Although the first prince has been domineering in the past, he has never been so arrogant. Now, that he dares to act so brazenly, could it be that he's about to take that step? I heard that he participated in the 8 Princes' Rebellion of the Holy See of Truth. I wonder what great benefits he has received. At this moment, the 4 examiners all felt an immense pressure gushing toward them. Chapter 249. Faced with the first prince's extremely domineering words, Fang Xingjian straightened his back, as if he had not been pressured in the slightest. The regional selection is the nation's policy, the will of the king. Are you saying that you're going to surpass the king and take matters into his own hands? Hearing Fang Xingjian's words, the first prince looked at him with a cold smile, as if he was looking at a clown on the ground. He spread out his hand, and the entire dark canopy once again closed in. Fang Xingjian, let me tell you today that before absolute power, logic, rules, and righteousness are all nonsense. Once absolute power breaks through, it will naturally become the rules. An incomparably deep and incomparably dark power descended from the sky, as if it was going to crush the entire sky. However, just then, a majestic power descended from the sky. It was like a gust of pure yang wind, blowing away a large area of darkness. This majestic and powerful power was like the sun in the sky, omnipresent and abnormally majestic, yet nourishing all living things, giving off the feeling of spring breeze. Stop it, elder brother. A voice descended along with this power, giving everyone a shock once again. Governor Devitt thought to himself, it's the second prince's thought across 1,000 li. His will has descended through space. Seeing this will descend through space, the first prince's gaze flickered and he said, "Oh, second brother, you're here to stop me as well?" The regional selection is a national event that was set up when the empire was established. It's for the purpose of uncovering talents, nurturing them, and strengthening the country's power. Moreover, elder brother, your cultivation is gradually approaching perfection. Although you have yet to cultivate all 36 Hell's maps, you're already on the verge of attaining the divine level. Why must you make things difficult for a mere knight? Hearing that the person who spoke was the second prince, everyone present was astonished. However, the information in the second prince's words caused everyone to be even more astonished. The first prince has yet to cultivate all 36 Hell's maps, but he's already on the verge of attaining the divine level. Divine level, divine level. His Majesty once said that once the first prince attains the divine level, he'll roam the world and hand over all the country's affairs to the first prince. So that's how it is. This time, His Majesty allowed the first prince to become the supervisor of the imperial family so that he could get rid of his dissidents, increase his influence, and completely distance himself from the other princes. His Majesty has completely chosen the first prince. Almost everyone was astonished by the second prince's words. The next king would definitely be the first prince, and he might even become the empire's 11th divine level expert, ruling over the world and leading the masses. Even the second prince's words this time around showed that he was showing weakness. Hearing the second prince's words, the first prince fell silent for a moment and said calmly, "Second brother, are you saying this because you want me to let Fang Xinjiang go?" The second prince's voice rang out once again. "Big brother, with your current cultivation, you'll probably only need 1 more year at most before you completely step into the divine level, right? By then, with your abilities, you will naturally be able to set your sights on the entire world. Your true opponents will also be the 3 mage kings, the countries in the north, and the Sand Nation in the west. If you were to step into the divine level 1 year later, I would naturally do my best to help you. Why do you have to hold on to a knight and not let go?" Humph. Hearing the second prince's words, the first prince felt very pleased and said, "All right, since second brother has said this, I naturally don't mind letting off a knight today. Within 1 year, I'll definitely become a divine level expert. I hope that when the time comes, you won't make a mistake and make a decision that will disappoint me." The second prince said calmly, "Big brother, if you're able to step into the divine level within a year, I'll naturally take you as my leader and serve the empire faithfully." The first prince stood up abruptly at the next moment, and a sharp aura engulfed the world. Streams of black cheese soared into the sky, as if they were squeezing out many black spatial gaps. "Since that's the case, Fang Xinjiang, I'll let you off today for being disrespectful. However, on account of second brother, I can't let you go without bringing a single person with me." With that, he grabbed out fiercely with his palm. It was as if the entire world had turned dark and everything was sucked into his palm. Under the guidance of this tremendous suction force, Wei Lung, who was at the side of the arena, was grabbed away. Together with the Dark Knight, they turned into 3 black lines and disappeared into the horizon. The first prince had wanted to grab Anderson, but he realized that this guy was extremely intelligent and had long since hidden behind the 4 examiners, unlike Wei Lung, who was still standing outside in a daze. The first prince could only give Anderson a long look before taking him away. At the same time, the first prince's domineering voice rang out from afar. "I'll be taking Wei Lung with me. As for the other procedures of the regional selection, you guys can do as you please." Although the first prince had let Fang Xinjiang off after the second prince had shown extreme weakness, he had still taken an examinee away under the watchful eyes of the crowd. It was as if the regional selection and the governor were nothing, yet no one present could do anything about it. It was because the news of the first prince stepping into the divine level was too shocking. Even though he was also at level 29, other than divine level experts, there was no one else who could be a match for him. However, although he was domineering, his actions this time around had still built up a great reputation for himself, leaving behind an indelible impression in the hearts of all the aristocrats in the Great Western region. After this battle, it was unknown how many people would turn their heads towards him. Seeing the first prince leave, Fang Xingzhan's eyes were filled with killing intent. Based on his character, he would have definitely killed the first prince with a single sword attack. However, not only was his abilities a far cry from the first prince's, he was also completely drained from the battle and could not even send out a single ether sword ripple. He thought to himself, "George Krieg, you said that you'll be able to step into the divine level within a year. Then within this year, I'll surpass the divine level. 1 year later, I'll kill you and then return to Demonic City to slaughter Catherine's entire clan, suppress Li Shuanghua, and force her to reveal the truth about my birth." Once again feeling the pressure from a powerful force, Fang Xingzhan once again yearned to become stronger. However, he had great faith in his talent. If he were to spend a year cultivating in the regional academy, he believed that he would definitely be able to achieve continuous breakthroughs, surpassing the first prince and surpassing the divine level. Only by becoming stronger would he be able to maintain his original heart and slay external demons. Only then would he be able to be free and unfettered. This would be the foundation of his future cultivation. Just then, a voice rang out in Fang Xingzhan's ears once again. "Xingzhan, I'm the second prince. After you leave the battle coliseum, come and meet me." Hearing that, Fang Xingzhan was stunned for a moment before he left the battle coliseum alone. In the battle coliseum behind him, although the final arena battles of the regional selection were still going on, with the first prince's actions, the arena battles were now like a farce. Everyone's hearts were no longer on the arena. The first prince is really someone favored by the heavens. At his level of power, he can disregard the rules and suppress everyone else. Fang Xingzhan is really unlucky to have offended the first prince this time around. I wonder what his choice will be 1 year later? If the first prince attains the divine level within a year, other than submitting to him, what else can he do? The first prince is too amazing. Didn't you see it? Even the second prince has submitted. What else can a knight like him do? Adri stood on the spectator's stand and watched as Fang Xingzhan left, laughing coldly in his heart. Since His Highness is going to take action personally, you'll definitely become a puppet on the Hell's map 1 year later. Of course, I won't have to take action either. By then, I'll see how you'll suffer a fate worse than death. You'll be working hard for His Highness through and through. As the deputy commander of the Forbidden Army, he was well aware of how terrifying the Hell's map was. After signing the Hell's map, it might seem as though one had obtained endless benefits, and one's powers would increase rapidly. However, in reality, one would not be able to decide one's life and death. Everything in one's life would be controlled by someone else, and it was a great pain. He looked forward to watching Fang Xingzhan suffering. Chapter 250. Although Fang Xingzhan had depleted a great deal of his physical strength, his physical attributes far surpassed that of ordinary people. With each step he took, he was still able to traverse a distance of over 10 meters. Under the guidance of the voice in his ears, he arrived at the back of a dilapidated building within a short few minutes. At the back of the building, a middle-aged lady was waiting there. She was dressed in a maid's attire and had an ordinary countenance, just like any other auntie on the streets. Fang Xingzhan looked at the middle-aged maid and asked, feeling a little puzzled, "Second prince?" The maid smiled and said, "I'm only temporarily borrowing her body. My killing technique, a thought across 1,000 li, allows my consciousness to continuously jump between different physical bodies, crossing very, very long distances. Therefore, I've been in many places before." Fang Xingzhan's eyes were still filled with puzzlement because of the second prince's performance today. This could be said to be to protect him. The second prince had shown extreme weakness to the first prince, and if these words were to spread, he would lose a lot of influence. It could even be said that he had completely lowered his head to the first prince today. As long as the first prince attained the divine level, he would completely submit to him. As if seeing Fang Xingzhan's puzzlement, the middle-aged maid slowly walked up to Fang Xingzhan. She stared at Fang Xingzhan's face and said slowly, "How is it Are you used to staying in Miracle World? Shock. Waves of killing intent were emitted from Fang Xingjian's body, and his heart thumped fiercely. It was as if he had not expected that his greatest secret would be revealed so easily. However, the middle-aged maid emitted an extremely vast, ethereal, and gentle aura that could enlighten and nourish all living things. It dispelled Fang Xingjian's killing intent bit by bit. Don't be nervous. I don't have any ill intentions toward you. The middle-aged maid smiled and reached out her hand, gently touching Fang Xingjian's face. I know your mother. Deep reminiscence flashed in the maid's eyes as she sighed and said, When I saw your face, I recognized your identity. It's because you look too much like her. Too much like her. Fang Xingjian recalled that his second uncle, Fang Yuehe, had said something similar in the past. He did not know that the eldest disciple of the holy Orzen, Yueluan, had also said that he looked like a person. Otherwise, he would have been even more confused about his past. He couldn't help but ask, You know my mother? The middle-aged maid smiled. I've said that I've been to many places through the thought across 10,000 li. Of course, I've been to your earth. What kind of person is she? Hearing Fang Xingjian's question, the middle-aged maid seemed to have thought of something interesting and suddenly laughed. She looked at Fang Xingjian and said, She is the most confident and talented woman I have ever seen in my life. He seemed to be recalling something. His pupils slightly widened, and many memories seemed to flash through his eyes. She is like a daughter loved by heaven and earth, a fairy blessed by the gods. No matter what it is, she will be able to understand and master it with just one look. I remember when I was learning Magic Prince with her, she would always say that it was too easy and that there wasn't anything more difficult. Fang Xingjian was stunned for a moment. You've learned Magic Prince before? You guys have been trying to study our knight's path. Of course, I've also tried to learn your Magic Prince. The middle-aged maid smiled and looked at Fang Xingjian with a gentle expression. She said, Your mother is a master in Magic Prince. On her 16th birthday, she completed the second transition and started to train in Miracle World. Fang Xingjian asked, Then do you know who my father is? I don't know. A hint of sadness flashed in the maid's eyes as she said calmly, After your mother came to the Empire, we toured around the Empire for about a month. After she came to Miracle World, she seemed to have a knot in her heart. However, no matter how I tried to ask her, she refused to explain. It was also during this period of time that the magic prints on her body started to improve greatly. Within a short month, she already possessed the power of a level 25 conferred knight. However, she became more and more unhappy. Every night, she would raise her head and look toward the north, as if there was something waiting for her to complete. A hint of astonishment flashed in Fang Xingjian's heart. To complete the second transition at the age of 16 and possess the power of a level 25 conferred knight a month later. Such a rate of improvement was terrifying. The second prince was still reminiscing. Finally, on the third day in the imperial capital, she left without saying goodbye. She left a letter saying that she was going to the north to search for the meaning of life. I had wanted to look for her, but at that time, the battle between me and eldest brother had reached its climax. I could only stay in the imperial capital and send many subordinates to chase after her, hoping to be able to protect and help her. Fang Xingjian asked, What happened after that? Where on earth did she go? I don't know. The maid let out a sigh and said, The mage country, Sand Country, and our empire in the south, together with the 3 countries in the north, make up the 6 strongest countries in the world. However, the 3 countries in the north, as well as the hundreds of small countries under them, have always been under the rule of the Holy See of Truth. The empire's influence there is far beyond their reach. Moreover, 17 years ago, the previous pope of the church mysteriously disappeared, and the 3 countries in the north went out of control. A chaotic war lasted for 10 years. Making it even more impossible for us to find your mother's whereabouts. When I received the next news, she was already, at the end, the middle-aged maid let out a soft sigh. Fang Xingjian asked, Did she die in my, or in Li Shuanghua's hands? I didn't see this with my own eyes, but that's what the rumors said back then said. Given your grandmother's character, it's very likely that this is true. He patted Fang Xingjian's shoulder and spoke like an honest elder. Xingjian, your talent is as dazzling as your mother's in the past. That's why I want to help you, so that you can truly unleash the talent in your body. After you enter the regional academy, work hard. You don't have to worry about eldest brother. No matter what, he's still my brother. As long as I give in, he won't really be ruthless. However, Fang Xingjian did not agree with the second prince's words. Firstly, the fact that he had attained his current level of power had nothing to do with his mother. He had not inherited any talent at all. Moreover, during the fight for the throne, there were plenty of cases of fathers and sons turning against each other, and brothers killing each other. This was especially so for someone like the first prince, who would die if he went against him. Fang Xingjian did not have much hope. However, the second prince did not seem to be able to tell anything. He handed a small booklet to Fang Xingjian and said, "This is a secret manual that I've just written down. It records one of the results of your mother's research. It's a mystical print that was created by combining the profoundness of magic prints and ether particles. It can increase your cultivation speed during your second transition. Take it and cultivate well." With that, a dazed look flashed in the maid's eyes. The second prince's voice once again rang out in Fang Xingjian's ears. "From now on, focus on your cultivation. If there's anything, you could talk to Governor Devitt. He's my trusted aide and will definitely help you. Also, your mother once said something. Don't ever cultivate magic prints. Never accept the power of evil gods." Chapter 251. The second prince's voice seemed to still be ringing in her ears, but the middle-aged maid's gaze had already regained its clarity. She looked at Fang Xingjian in a daze. Fang Xingjian threw her a glance and then left. The second prince's last words were still ringing in his mind. "Don't you want to cultivate magic prints?" "I came to Miracle World without even completing my first transition. Since when have I learned magic prints?" Looking at the booklet in his hand, Fang Xingjian kept the booklet and headed for the examinee's dormitory. He sat down cross-legged and started to treat his injuries. Although he had a great desire for power and was also very curious about the booklet the second prince had given him, he had depleted all his energy and was injured. The most important thing for him to do now was to treat his injuries. He would only be able to truly start cultivating after he had treated his injuries. Just like that, the last day of the arena battle passed. Fang Xingjian became this year's regional champion. Holt was second, and Anderson was third. However, their limelight had been completely overshadowed by the first prince. Right now, the most discussed topic in the entire Great Western City was the news that the first prince was about to step into the divine level. Right now, Fang Xingjian was the only one left in the dormitory. His brows slowly relaxed, and he let out a breath. He had finally finished treating his internal and external injuries. However, his vital energy and blood were lacking, and he would need to have a big meal to replenish them. Of course, this was not a problem in the regional academy. Moreover, although he was not a conferred knight yet, he was already this year's regional champion. He called the maid over and gave some instructions. 20 minutes later, a table of dishes was sent to Fang Xingjian. However, Fang Xingjian was no longer in the mood to appreciate the delicacies. He gobbled down the food, circulated his organs, replenished his vital energy and blood, and then flipped open the booklet and started to read its contents. The entire booklet described how to use various special materials, such as medicine, the blood of ferocious beasts, metal powder, and many other things, to carve a special type of prints on one's body. These prints were known as mystical prints. They did not receive the evil god's power like the magic prints, but they received the power of ether particles. Fang Xingjian knew that after a knight went through the second transition and became a conferred knight, not only would they need to exchange information with ether particles and sense the outside world, they would also need to exchange energy with ether particles. Only then would they be able to borrow the tremendous powers of the heavens and earth and perform various powerful killing techniques. Mystical prints were a method to assist in the exchange of ether particles. They could increase a cultivator's cultivation speed by several folds. After looking through the cultivation method for the mystical prince, Feng Xingjian let out a long exhale. His sword arts were remarkable, and he would be able to master any sword arts in a single move. The only thing he lacked was the cultivation of ether particles. Now that he had the mystical prince, he would be able to get twice the results with half the effort. This would allow him to have greater confidence in going up against the first prince and suppressing Li Shuanghua in the future. However, there's a total of 10 levels to the mystical prince. Each level can increase the efficiency of the exchange of ether particles by 1-fold. However, the price of the materials required each time would get increasingly expensive. If I wish to complete the cultivation of the mystical prince, I'll still need to earn a large sum of money. Moreover, although the cultivation of the mystical prince will deplete a tremendous amount of money, with this efficiency, any conferred knight would probably fight over it crazily. Before I become truly powerful, I must not reveal this to anyone. After finishing his thoughts, he put away the mystical prince. The cultivation of the mystical prince was not something that he could complete in a short period of time. Just the cultivation of the first level alone would cost Feng Xingjian over 100,000 gold coins, which was equivalent to the budget of a prefectural academy for half a year. He still needed to think of a way to earn a large sum of money before he could start cultivating the mystical prince. However, as long as he had the mystical prince, he would be able to increase the rate of his ether synchronization. He was not affected at all. Layers of silver fog started to spread out from his palms as he continued to cultivate his martial arts. From then on, Feng Xingjian did not care about any of the matters regarding the regional selection. Regardless of whether it was a ball, a celebration banquet, a meet and greet, or a private gathering, he rejected all of them. He sank into the deepest level of cultivation, quietly waiting to enter the regional academy to start his cultivation. 3 days later, he was informed by a maid to go to the headmaster's office in the regional academy. Rhoda, Manny, Holt, and Anderson were all waiting there. However, the regional academy's headmaster, Governor Devitt, seemed to have yet to arrive. Rhoda and Manny waved at Feng Xingjian. This time around, Rhoda had become 6th, while Manny had become 8th due to Wei Lung's departure. Anderson crossed his legs and sat on the sofa without a care for his image. However, when Holt saw Feng Xingjian, he walked over as well. He had the Crimson Fire longsword by his waist and was dressed in an aristocrat's attire. He exuded a luxurious disposition that belonged to the upper class. He sat down next to Feng Xingjian and said calmly, "I've asked teacher these few days." The first prince was already extremely close to attaining the divine level. Over at the Holy Sea of Truth, he snatched the remains of a divine level expert and performed the ancient path of Hell's reincarnation technique, merging the divine remains into his own body. He's already 1 foot into the divine level. With his talent, there's really a chance that he'll be able to attain the divine level within a year. When the time comes, in order to cultivate the 36 Hells maps to great perfection, he'll probably still come looking for you. As a follower of a divine level expert, Holt was naturally not worried that the first prince would do anything to him. However, it would be very dangerous for Feng Xingjian. After giving Feng Xingjian a reminder, Holt patted him on the shoulder and left. Rhoda frowned and said, "Why is the first prince so insistent on cultivating the 36 Hells maps? Logically speaking, once he's reached the divine level, he shouldn't care about the number of peak knights under him, right?" Manny shook his head and said, "That's not the case. It said that the founder of the ancient path of Hell, Adam, was the only person to successfully cultivate the 36 Hells maps. He was also one of the few experts in history who broke through the restrictions of the divine level and had a lifespan that surpassed the limits of humans. It said that after he was buried in his grave, someone secretly opened his coffin and discovered that his corpse had disappeared. The ancient path of Hell thought that someone had stolen his corpse and searched for him to no avail. However, in the decades and centuries that followed, there were rumors that Adam's figure had appeared. "I know," Rhoda nodded and said, "It means that there are people who look alike And there are also people who don't age even after 10 or several decades, right? Aren't these all groundless rumors? Why would the first prince believe these things? Manny shrugged and said, for someone at the first prince's level, it's better to believe that there are rumors than not, right? Just then, Anderson said coldly, if this guy dares to force me, even if I can't kill him, I'll still assassinate his subordinates one by one. Humph. When the 10 knights who had advanced in the regional selection heard this, they were all slightly stunned. Only Fong Xingjian remained expressionless. The others seemed to have been shocked by Anderson's audacity. Anderson looked at Fong Xingjian and said, Fong Xingjian, don't think that you're the only one who dares to go against the first prince. If you were to ask me during the regional selection's arena battle, I'd definitely reply 10 times more forcefully than you. Manny grinned and said helplessly, who's going to compete with you on this? A few minutes later, Headmaster Devitt finally arrived at the office. The moment he entered, he went straight to the point. The regional selection has ended. The reason I've called you guys here today is to help you arrange the procedures to enroll in the regional academy, as well as to exchange for the rewards for the top 10 in the regional selection. Hearing the headmaster's words, everyone's eyes lit up. Chapter 252. Fong Xingjian's heart stirred slightly. The first place of the regional selection this time around would be rewarded with a full set of level 29 superior divine weapon equipment. This was a very terrifying reward. Holt had relied on a level 29 superior divine weapon, Crimson Fire, to be able to unleash the abilities of a conferred knight at the knight level. How powerful would a full set of level 29 equipment be? The headmaster nodded at everyone. In a while, someone will bring you to choose your superior divine weapons and the killing techniques passed down in the royal family. From now on, you'll be students of the Great Western Region Regional Academy. I won't say anything unnecessary, but you must know that the Regional Academy will not be supporting you for nothing. Examinees who are unable to attain Heaven's Perception and complete the second transition within 3 years will be expelled. Don't blame me for not warning you in advance. Hearing the headmaster's words, everyone present felt a chill in their hearts. They knew that the headmaster was not trying to scare them. Although they had passed the regional selection, they only had the right to be nurtured by the regional academy with all their might and strive to become conferred knights. It was not certain that they would become conferred knights in the future. Throughout history, there had been many people who had passed the regional selection but had not been able to attain Heaven's Perception after 3 years of hard work. In the end, they had been expelled by the regional academy. Therefore, a few of the examinees who had been in high spirits immediately felt a heavy pressure. The end of the regional selection was not the beginning. Instead, it was the start of an even more important and lasting competition. However, Fong Xingjian did not feel any pressure at all. He had already attained Heaven's Perception. As long as he was fully prepared, he would be able to advance to the second transition in the regional academy at any time. Holt, Anderson, Rhoda, and Manny were also very confident. They had received a gift from the melancholic monarch and had grasped a hint of inspiration from Heaven's Perception. They were very confident that they would be able to go through the second transition within the next 3 years. All right, you guys can go out. There will be someone outside to receive you. Fong Xingjian, you stay behind. Under everyone's envious, worried, or jealous gazes, Fong Xingjian stayed behind in the headmaster's office. Devitt looked at Fong Xingjian and said, your reward for the regional selection is a level 29 superior divine weapon set. The prowess of this set is extraordinary, possessing almost 50% of a level 29 knight's power. It's extremely powerful. Fong Xingjian smiled. When will I be able to get it? There'll be someone specially assigned to escort it here from the imperial capital. It'll take about 5 days or so. Devitt looked at Fong Xingjian and continued. When do you plan to go through the second transition? I've already applied for the sacred land of the highest level. The ether particle density there is 100 times that of the outside world, and it'll be able to speed up your cultivation after the second transition. Thinking of this, he let out a sigh and said, You understand the situation in the country. Right now, the first prince is suppressing everyone else. He'll probably ascend to the throne within 1 or 2 years. If you want to break through his restrictions, you'll have to make use of every minute and second to cultivate. Fang Xingjian nodded and said, "When can I go to the Holy Land to change my job?" When Governor Devitt heard Fang Xingjian's words, he felt that he was in too much of a rush. Job transition? So fast. Don't you need to prepare? What profession are you going to choose? Fang Xingjian said, "Wait for me to take a look at the information on the second transition. If my attributes meet the requirements, I'll go straight away." Theoretically speaking, as long as one attained heaven's perception and then went to a sacred land with a sufficient ether particle density, they would be able to complete the second transition. Due to heaven's perception, knights would be able to receive information on the second transition directly from the ether particles. They would then be able to choose one of the many available jobs as their second transition. However, there were also various requirements for the second transition. The stronger the job, the higher the requirements. Fang Xingjian's idea was not to continue tempering his attributes or specialties in the first transition for too long. He wanted to take a look at the strongest job he could transition to, and if he was able to do so, he would do so. If he was lacking in the requirements, he would go and raise his level. There was no need for him to stay at level 19 for too long. After all, his sword arts talent and mystical prints were right there. With the crazy synthesis of killing techniques, as well as the enhancement from the mystical prints, his ether synchronization rate was also increasing very quickly. Even if his job was slightly weaker, it would not hinder the increase in his abilities. Moreover, with his current attributes, he believed that he would be able to go through most of the second transition job successfully. Governor Devitt frowned. He had wanted to advise Fang Xingjian to build up his foundation and transition to a stronger second transition job. However, after giving it some thought, he knew that Fang Xingjian was under a lot of pressure and did not have much time to build up his foundation. Governor Devitt nodded and arranged for Fang Xingjian to once again receive the knight attire for a conferred knight. The Scarlet Cloak was a powerful piece of equipment that had the defense of a level 19 inferior divine weapon. The blue and white knight attire fitted Fang Xingjian very closely. It was warm in the winter and cool in the summer, and it was also very light and thin like silk pajamas. The scarlet cloak was draped on Fang Xingjian's back, making flapping sounds like burning flames. It had the ability to defend against high and low temperatures, reduce gravity, and increase one's speed. This was the privilege of a conferred knight. Once one wore this, even if one did not make a move, one would be able to do whatever they wanted in the entire empire. The maid smiled and said, "Sir, does the clothes fit you? Do you need any changes?" "There's no need." Fang Xingjian shook his head and walked out. The other reward for the regional selection was to choose a royal killing technique. The royal killing technique was a powerful killing technique that the empire's royal family kept in secret. Moreover, they were all specially used by second transition knights, allowing them to borrow the tremendous powers of the heavens and the earth. When a second transition knight attained heaven's perception, they would possess the attribute of ether synchronization rate. They would be able to exchange information and energy with ether particles. Exchanging information could increase one's insight and talent, as well as widen the path of cultivation. Exchanging energy could allow a conferred knight to borrow the tremendous powers of the heavens and the earth for battle, greatly increasing their destructive prowess. However, each regional academy had a limited collection of these royal killing techniques. For example, the Great Western Region Regional Academy had a total of 8 sets, known as the 8 Techniques of the West. Some of the 8 Techniques of the West were limited to weapons, while others did not matter what kind of weapon they were. They were the Dragon-Slaying Sword Technique, Titan Divine Strength, Violet Electric Taishi Blade, Hell's Gate, Evil Judgment, 10-Directional Unrivaled Strike, 90,000 Godly Demon Flash, and Sanguine Rampage. When the examinees of each batch of the regional selection entered the academy, they would be able to choose one of the 8 techniques of the West as their killing technique. They could then integrate it with other techniques or synthesize it with other techniques, greatly increasing their battle prowess. Of course, the 8 techniques of the West was merely the beginning of the cultivation of the second transition. Other than ether synchronization rate and attributes, the most important factor for the second transition's battle prowess was how powerful the killing technique cultivated was. The more killing techniques were synthesized successfully, the higher their quality would be, and the more compatible they would be with themselves. Thus, the battle prowess unleashed by those of the same level would naturally be stronger. A maid passed the introduction to the 8 techniques of the West to Fang Xingjian. Fang Xingjian looked at the introduction of the 8 techniques of the West. Right now, his greatest strengths were mainly based on 3 aspects: his own speed, ether sword ripples, and terra ingurgitation. If he were to choose a killing technique, he would naturally have to choose one that could complement these 3 aspects, strengthening or perfecting them. For his current battles, it would be sufficient to use the luminous heaven soaring slash. If his opponent was even stronger, he would use boundaries negation to unleash his full explosive speed. If his opponent was even stronger, he would use ether sword ripples. If his opponent was even stronger, he would use terra ingurgitation. This was the composition of his current abilities. His next plan was very simple. After choosing the killing technique that would be rewarded, he would complete his job transition within a short period of time. Thereafter, he would continue to cultivate sets of killing techniques in the regional academy, strengthening his techniques through synthesis. The other was to earn money to cultivate the mystical prince and increase his ether synchronization rate. In the second transition, one would only be able to level up with an increase of 10% in their ether synchronization rate. In order to level up from level 19 to level 29, one would need to increase their ether synchronization rate to 100%. Moreover, the ether synchronization rate would also affect how much power one could borrow from the heavens and the earth. Therefore, in the second transition, the ether synchronization rate was extremely important. Moreover, after earning money, he would be able to purchase all sorts of heavenly and earthly treasures to increase his attributes and specialties, strengthening his foundation. In short, the cultivation of the second transition was to increase one's attributes and the foundations of one's specialties. One would also need to cultivate and synthesize techniques, as well as increase their ether synchronization rate and level. As he thought about synthesizing killing techniques, earning money, and increasing his ether synchronization rate in the future, Fang Xingjian's gaze gradually locked onto a killing technique. Chapter 253. The technique that Fang Xingjian was interested in was the 90,000 Godly Demon Flash. The 90,000 Godly Demon Flash was a set of sword technique that made use of speed, footwork, light, and shadows to create errors in one's vision and hearing. Each sword attack would create layers of illusions, and it was said that in the end, there would be a myriad of illusions. Coupled with the power of ether particles, these illusions would have physical bodies. What was even more amazing was that the cultivator would be able to change their positions with the illusions at any time. Of course, the illusions could not be more than 1,000 meters away from the cultivator. The reason why Fang Xingjian valued this set of killing technique was firstly because it was a set of sword technique killing technique. Fang Xingjian's talent in sword arts was the best in the world, so he naturally had to choose a sword-related killing technique. Only then would he be able to cultivate it quickly, synthesize techniques endlessly, and continuously increase the prowess of his killing technique. The second reason was that the 90,000 Godly Demon Flash had both offense and defense, and it was related to light and speed. It was very compatible with his current luminous heaven soaring slash. Actually, Fang Xingjian also liked the killing technique Blood Rampage very much. It allowed him to unleash an outburst of vital energy and blood, change his physical form, and enter a rampage state after transforming, greatly increasing his 5 attributes. It was a pity that this was a type of transformation killing technique. For a killing technique like this, which required one to change their physical form, there were very high requirements for one's endurance and flexibility attributes. Fang Xingjian had yet to meet these requirements. As a speed-type knight, He was more suited for killing techniques that relied on footwork and speed to create destructive prowess. Therefore, Feng Xingjian instructed the maid next to him, "I'll choose the 90,000 godly demon flash. What should I do next?" The maid bowed and said, "In a while, a teacher who cultivates the 90,000 godly demon flash will be here to guide you. Please wait here for a while." Feng Xingjian nodded and sat cross-legged in the courtyard to rest. He knew that although the regional academy was a place to nurture conferred knights, it was impossible for every teacher to be a conferred knight. It was even more impossible for a conferred knight's teacher to stay in the academy all the time. There were many teachers who were conferred knights in the entire academy, but there were less than half of them who actually taught. Each of them had their own businesses, clans, and influences. Therefore, most of them would only come over when they needed to teach, spending most of their time outside. Of course, there were also some conferred knights who were obsessed with martial arts who stayed in the academy. While they pursued unparalleled martial arts, they also took on the role of teachers. These people had always been in the academy. After waiting for about 2 hours, an old man with messy hair and a slovenly appearance walked in. He did not look like a knight at all. After entering, he casually threw a glance at Feng Xingjian and said, "You're the examinee from this batch?" At least he's calm. Feng Xingjian's brows twitched slightly. With one look, he could tell that this old man was a knight who was obsessed with martial arts. Feng Xingjian did not find it strange that the old man was not clear about his identity. There were too many knights who were obsessed with martial arts and did not care about the outside world. Even Feng Xingjian did not know who they were. Just by studying martial arts and ether particles, they already felt that 24 hours was not enough. How could they, who were obsessed with their cultivation, still be concerned about the outside world? This was especially so for these conferred knights who stood at the pinnacle of the world, the regional selection, which was a small matter. It was because it would usually take several years or even decades for the regional knights in the same batch to reach a stage where they could help them. The old man threw a glance at Feng Xingjian and did not greet him much. Instead, he said impatiently, "I have many things to do. I'll leave after I teach you once. If you have any questions, you can practice on your own." With that, he casually waved his hand and broke a tree branch across space. Holding it in his hand, he continued to practice his sword moves. The most important parts of the 90,000 godly demon flash are the movement techniques, sword arts, and the use of ether particles. This killing technique was left behind by the Flash sect, which was destroyed 300 years ago. It was collected by the royal family over the past few decades and is an extremely profound killing technique. You haven't gone through the second transition yet, so it'll definitely be very difficult for you to cultivate it. The clones formed from the 90,000 godly demon flash are known as godly demon clones. Each of them has a physical body that has been injected with ether particles. As he spoke, the old man waved the tree branch, and with a slight sway, a godly demon clone was formed. The branches in the hands of the two silhouettes clashed, creating light banging sounds. First, I'll teach you the movement techniques. There are a total of 128 movement techniques in the entire 90,000 godly demon flash. They are interlinked and serve as a link between the previous and the following. Only through the transformation of these movement techniques will a godly demon clone be formed. Next is the control of ether particles. Ether particles are waves, so you have to pay attention to the frequency. There's a trick here, which is to maintain the same frequency as your sword technique. The reason why the 90,000 godly demon flash is a set of sword technique is that it changes the frequency of the human body through this set of sword technique, allowing it to create godly demon clones. As he spoke, the old man demonstrated all the movement techniques and sword moves of the 90,000 godly demon flash. Although his tone and expression were very impatient, the demonstration was still rather complete. At the very least, he did not miss out a single move or stance. After spending a total of 3 hours, he had mentioned every single detail. "All right, I'm done. If you can't, you can apply to go to the library to read up on the information. Don't come and trouble me again." After saying that, he discovered that Fang Xingjian had also started to practice the 90,000 godly demon flash. However, when he attacked, he could clearly feel that Fang Xingjian was still very immature and inexperienced. It was obvious that Fang Xingjian had just started practicing and was still not very familiar with it. The old man laughed and said, "Haha, do you think that this set of sword technique is very easy? This is a killing technique of a conferred knight, a second transition killing technique. It requires the activation of the tremendous powers of the heavens and the earth, exchanging energy with ether particles. It's not as simple as the first transition killing techniques you've learned in the past." After saying the last two words, the old man was suddenly stunned. It was because when the old man said the first half of his sentence, Fang Xingjian's sword technique and movement techniques had become much more familiar, as if he had been practicing them for a few months. By the time the second half of his sentence was finished, Fang Xingjian's 90,000 godly demon flash was already extremely smooth. Each move and stance met the most standard requirements, and even the strictest teacher would not be able to find any flaws. It was as if he had been practicing it for a few years. Then, under the old man's astonished gaze, Fang Xingjian's body swayed, and a godly demon clone appeared with a flash. Then, the clone and the original body started to attack each other. The demonish howl in their hands clashed against each other, releasing crisp sounds. However, after a few consecutive collisions, the godly demon clone disappeared. Fang Xingjian also stopped and mumbled to himself, "It's a little different from my habits. I can make some changes." With that, he swung the long sword in his hand and started to change the sword moves of the 90,000 godly demon flash. He performed the same move 5 times consecutively, each time with slight changes. After the 5th time, a change suddenly flashed on his body, and another godly demon clone appeared with a flash. Regardless of whether it was its appearance, aura, or movements, they were all many times more condensed and realistic than the previous time. The old man looked at everything in disbelief and said, "Is this really the first time you've cultivated the 90,000 godly demon flash?" He almost thought that Fang Xingjian had learned it before and was just pretending not to have done so. However, thinking of Fang Xingjian's initial choppy movements and immature changes, it was definitely not something that could be faked so easily. At the next moment, this teacher from the regional academy, who was obsessed with martial arts, could not help but ask, "What's your name? Your talent isn't bad. How about it? Do you want to help my sword arts team?" Chapter 254. Hops had thought that after saying these words, Fang Xingjian would definitely bow down to him and willingly join his sword arts team. He was currently the best in sword arts in the entire regional academy, the strongest sword arts professor. Any page of the research content of his sword arts team would be worth thousands of gold if sold. There were countless teachers who wished to join and study sword arts together with him, let alone the students. He had been astonished by Fang Xingjian's talent, and his love for talent rose in his heart. This was why he had invited Fang Xingjian. However, Fang Xingjian threw a glance at Hops and asked, "What's a sword arts team?" Hops was stunned for a moment before recalling that Fang Xingjian was a new student. He explained casually, "Every senior teacher in the regional academy can receive a portion of the budget to research into some top-notch ether particles. I specialize in sword arts, and my current research is in the direction of sword art synthesis." Saying this, he could not help but say proudly, "Currently, I've already developed 3 new synthesis formulas and obtained 3 sets of new second transition killing techniques. In the past, I've also created a few sets of sword techniques myself." Thinking of this, he became even more interested in Fang Xingjian. If Fang Xingjian's talent was really as outstanding as his performance, and he was able to pick up sword techniques so quickly, it would be a great help to his research on sword art synthesis. Fang Xingjian nodded in understanding. He knew that not everyone had such monstrous talent like him. The speed at which people picked up killing techniques was slow, and the success rate of synthesis was not 100%. Therefore, there would naturally be people who would deduce the possible synthesis results based on the various information and principles of sword arts. With so many killing techniques, it would be impossible for ordinary conferred knights to synthesize all of them. Even for level 29 conferred knights who had a 100% success rate, how long would it take for them to cultivate a set of killing technique to the maximum level? It would take them at least half a year or even a year. How would they be able to know the synthesis results of each killing technique? Moreover, after 2 killing techniques were synthesized, they might become stronger. However, not every synthesis would be suitable for the cultivator. Therefore, it was extremely important to know the synthesis results in advance. It was just like how the many ultimate killing techniques of the ancient path of hell were all synthesized through the accumulation of various synthesis formulas. Unparalleled and powerful killing techniques were all developed bit by bit, just like that. This was why there were sword arts teams like Hops. Relying on their profound theories, deep understanding of sword arts, as well as their research on the 2 sets of primitive sword techniques, they would deduce the synthesis results in advance and find the most outstanding one. They would then get others to try it out, hoping to create a newer and more powerful killing technique. This was much better than trying to find a needle in a haystack. However, Fang Xingjian did not need to study such things. He only needed to learn the regional academy's killing techniques by himself. Getting people to study him was not asking for trouble. He also knew that with his current abilities, if he were to enter Hop's sword arts team, he would definitely be treated as a research subject. His time would also be controlled by Hops, and how would this fit in with his plans? Therefore, he shook his head and said, "Not interested." With that, he left, leaving Hops with his back view. Hops had been waiting for Fang Xingjian to join excitedly, but he had not expected him to just leave like that. Hops was not angry, but he was in a daze, as if he could not react. Other than the sacred land and the level 29 armor, Fang Xingjian had also confirmed all the rewards for the regional selection. Therefore, he headed to the Regional Academy's library to look up information related to the second transition. He asked for directions along the way and arrived before a huge stone castle. The entire stone castle looked like a castle from the Middle Ages, filled with all sorts of complicated carvings, prints, and statues. This was the Regional Academy's library, guarded by 3 conferred knights all year round. It contained countless powerful secret manuals and top-secret information, and only students and teachers of the Regional Academy could enter. It was just like the Shaolin Temple's Sutra Depository in wuxia novels. Fang Xingjian walked up to the stone castle and saw a huge wooden sign erected there. The wooden sign was 5 meters tall and half a meter thick, and there were many names carved on it. This was the ranking of the Regional Academy students. During each national selection, only the top 10 conferred knights would be able to participate in it. Fang Xingjian lifted his head and looked at the first name on the list, Odysseus, and the second name was Hildebrand. Fang Xingjian continued to scan through the long list, stopping at the 55th place. Fang Xingjian continued scanning and saw that his name was in the 56th place. Fang Xingjian, together with Anderson, Holt, and the others, were all ranked in the last 10. This meant that there were originally 55 students in the Regional Academy, and with the addition of their cohort, there were 65 of them. The reason why there was such a ranking was because of some of the Regional Academy systems. The Regional Academy was different from Cursed Royal Academy. Firstly, there was no concept of classes. Every week, they would arrange various classes, and each student would be free to choose which classes they wanted to attend. Moreover, every year, there would be an examination for each class, and the results of the examinations would determine the amount of credits one would receive each year. Only when one's credits reached a certain amount would they be able to continue their studies in the academy. Secondly, all the examinees would have a ranking. For example, when Fang Xingjian and the others had just enrolled, they would be ranked last. Students who were ranked lower could challenge students who were ranked higher. After defeating them, they would be able to take over their opponent's ranking. The challenged student and all the other students behind him would automatically be pushed back by 1 place. Of course, there are also requirements for such challenges. Each examinee could only challenge a maximum of 5 times a year, and they could only accept a challenge once a week. Moreover, they were not allowed to reject challenges. Fang Xingjian casually scanned through the rankings and entered the library. He had to make the best use of his time to look up information on job transitions. After flashing his knight emblem to the guard at the entrance, Fang Xingjian entered the library. The entire library was split into 3 floors, and each floor had over 10 rows of bookshelves. The books on the first and second floors could be freely read, but the third floor was filled with all sorts of secret manuals on killing techniques. One would need to make a special application in order to gain access to them. However, Fang Xingjian's current goal was the second transition, and he was not here to learn new killing techniques. Therefore, there was no need for him to go to the third floor. As only students and teachers could come here, there were very few people in the library, and it was also very quiet. After Fang Xingjian entered, no one looked at him. He followed the rows of signs in the library and found the information that introduced second transition jobs. The books here were obviously taken care of all year round. All the books were categorized into different categories, and it was the same for second transition jobs. They were categorized according to strength, agility, endurance, reaction, flexibility, and many other attributes. Clearly, for different categories, the growth of their attributes and the requirements for their attributes would all be different. Fang Xingjian picked up a book that introduced the agility-type second transition jobs and started reading it. He spent the entire night reading, and over 10 books introducing the agility-type second transition jobs were read by him one by one. Thankfully, he had attained heaven's perception. Otherwise, he would not have been able to read them at all. It was only when the sky was bright that he let out a breath and closed the last book. Countless second transition jobs flashed through his mind, and he started to think about which one he should choose. Chapter 255. Fang Xingjian recalled in his mind, and many powerful second transition jobs appeared in his mind. Astral Sword Saint, a powerful swordsman who gathered astral powers, manipulated astral powers, radiated astral flames, and performed astral sword techniques. Death Primordial Darkness, a swordsman who controlled shadows and walked amidst darkness and death, gathering vengeful intents, evil spirits, and negative emotions in the world to refine them into sword cheese for combat. Zenith Light Sword Grandmaster, a swordsman who shook space and transmitted power through spatial tremors to attack. As the speed of spatial tremors was at light speed, the Zenith Light Sword Grandmaster's attack speed was also at light speed. However, space was too sturdy, and the attenuation of the tremors was too strong. Therefore, his light speed attacks were only at 1,000th of their normal prowess. Hurricane Massacre, a swordsman who could freely control the atmosphere with sword cheese, creating sword cheese hurricanes and sword cheese tornadoes. Their destructive prowess could reach up to 100 kilometers. Amongst all the second transition jobs, this was one of the jobs with the strongest wide-area attacks. Of course, there's also the unparalleled Sword Overlord, which was considered to be the pinnacle of swordsman jobs and the strongest swordsman job amongst all the second transition jobs. They could instantly learn and modify any sword technique in the world, and under the submission of thousands of swords, they could pursue the pinnacle of sword arts. These 5 jobs were the 5 most powerful jobs that Fang Xingjian could find. They were also the 5 jobs that he had fulfilled the requirements for and could take on. After becoming a conferred knight, they would be so powerful that they could destroy the world and crush all conferred knights of ordinary jobs. Through the library's information, Fang Xingjian had a detailed understanding of these 5 jobs. In the end, he decided to choose the unparalleled Sword Overlord. It was because he knew that the unparalleled Sword Overlord's ability, coupled with his sword arts talent, would be able to completely stimulate his potential, allowing him to achieve twice the results with half the effort and reach the pinnacle of sword arts within the shortest amount of time. Of course, there was another very important point. The unparalleled Sword Overlord would only provide additional specialties and would not modify the original waves and mental cultivation method. The prodigious astral divine powers waves that Feng Xingjian had obtained, as well as the universal sword dominance lunisolar mental cultivation method, were both very powerful. He did not wish to switch to other waves after his second transition. However, Feng Xingjian knew that after entering the sacred land, he would be able to use heaven's perception to read the information in the ether particles and choose his own job. He did not need to be like the first job transition, where he would have to passively and unconsciously accept the job transition. Therefore, Feng Xingjian had also deduced that since he had been able to choose the job Wind Shadow Sword Divinity, which had not been recorded during his first transition, then he might also be able to choose the hidden and powerful job that had not been recorded during his second transition. Closing the book, Feng Xingjian did not need to make any preparations. At a moment when no one was aware of him, he slowly headed toward the regional academy's sacred land. As a swordsman who trained 24 hours a day and was constantly on edge, as if he was treading on thin ice, he was prepared to face anything at all times. The sacred land was located in the center of the academy. It should be said that the sacred land, which had an ether particle density that far surpassed that of ordinary areas, was first discovered, and then the regional academy was built around this area. The entire sacred land was divided into 10 regions according to the density of ether particles, ranging from 10 times to 100 times. Theoretically, students who had just enrolled could only enter the region with a density of 30 times. However, as Feng Xingjian's talent was too outstanding, and with the pressure from the first prince, Governor Devitt had helped him apply to enter the central region with a density of 100 times. The first prince might not have expected this, or perhaps he did not care at all. It was because under the immense pressure from him, a portion of people would lean towards him. However, there would also be a portion of people who would break through their limits and think of all sorts of ways to go against him. It was just like how he had made an exception and allowed Feng Xingjian to enter the sacred land with a density of 100 times. Feng Xingjian headed toward the center of the regional academy. On the way there, he did not see many people. After all, this was a school that took up an area of over 10 square kilometers, yet only had 65 students. Rather than saying that it was a school, it would be more accurate to say that it was more like a research institution. Therefore, Feng Xingjian did not meet with any obstructions along the way and arrived at the entrance of the sacred land. What appeared before him was a huge forest that stretched out endlessly. As there were too few students and teachers, the entire sacred land had not been renovated into a large area of man-made buildings. Instead, it still retained the appearance of a primeval forest. However, a path had been built at the entrance, allowing one to reach the center of the sacred land. Of course, if one were to think that one could enter and exit the forest as they pleased, they would be making a huge mistake. Other than the path that had been built, the forests on both sides of the path had all sorts of ether powers channeled into them by generations of conferred knights and even divine-level experts. If one were to enter the forest carelessly, even a conferred knight might be killed. Therefore, the only way to enter the sacred land was through the path that had been built. If one wanted to cultivate in it, they could only go through the many houses that had been built along the path. The moment Feng Xingjian entered the forest, he could sense that many pairs of eyes seemed to be secretly looking at him. He knew that these were the ferocious beasts that were guarding the sacred land. They were different from the ferocious beasts outside. They had been reared here ever since the academy had been set up and were in charge of guarding the sacred land. It was because generations of them had been in an area where the density of ether particles far surpassed that of ordinary spaces. Therefore, their evolution was also different from the ferocious beasts outside. It should be said that they were more intelligent and stronger. After Feng Xingjian walked 10 meters into the forest, a white deer that was about 2 meters tall, had huge horns, and had a faint glow on its body. It walked out slowly from the forest and came up to Feng Xingjian. With each step the white deer took, there would be a faint glow that was like that of fireflies, flashing with a green glow. Feng Xingjian recalled what the female servant had said about the sacred land and took out his knight's badge. The white deer walked up and seemed to sniff at Feng Xingjian's knight's badge, then looked at the prints on it and Feng Xingjian's face. Then it snorted and left. As it left, Feng Xingjian felt that the pressure in the surroundings had receded like receding tides. This deer is giving me such a strong pressure. Level 25? Level 26? Looking at the white deer's departing figure, Feng Xingjian suddenly felt curious. He wondered if this unknown ferocious beast was tasty or not. Shaking his head, he tossed aside the strange thoughts in his mind. He walked along the path and first arrived at the outermost area with a density of 10 times. The moment he stepped into this area, he felt a strong difference. It was as if there were several hundred people around him, not listening to his whispers, and the images he had constructed in his mind were like snowflakes with poor reception. What strong ether particles! Feng Xingjian took in a deep breath, as if he could feel that he had inhaled over 100 different scents. They were countless pieces of information rushing into his brain. Chapter 256. With Feng Xingjian's mental fortitude, he was able to get used to the situation where the density was 10 times more than normal in just over 10 seconds. He was not affected by the information at all. He continued to move forward all the way to the area with 30 times the density. There were still forests and hills everywhere, just like a modern forest park. However, along the way, he could constantly sense that there seemed to be countless eyes spying on him from the darkness in the forest. He knew that these were the guardian ferocious beasts keeping tabs on him. However, he had obtained the authority to enter the sacred land with 100 times the density, so he was naturally not afraid of their surveillance. He continued to move forward with great strides. He also saw many houses built by the roadside. Each house was built with huge marble. They were spacious, huge, vast, and filled with an ancient aura. Feng Xingjian could sense that from most of the houses, there would occasionally be intense, air-piercing sounds, thunderous booms, or unique auras of sword or saber intents. He knew that there were people cultivating, researching, or training in seclusion in these houses. He did not care about these and continued to move forward. He sensed that the ether particles in the surroundings were getting increasingly denser, and he felt as if he was a rubbish bin, with all sorts of rubbish being stuffed into his brain. It was as if he was an old computer that had been stuffed with a tremendous amount of data that could cause his hard disk to explode. Even with Feng Xingjian's willpower and mental prowess, he could not help but stop at the area with 50 times the density of ether particles and sit down on the ground. He continued to adjust his body, relax his breathing, and shift his attention. Bit by bit, he got used to the terrifying flow of information brought about by the 50 times ether particles density. He had an ether synchronization rate of 10%. It was hard for him to imagine how those higher-leveled confer knights would feel when they came to this place. It was no wonder that as the ether synchronization rate increased, some people would go crazy from not being able to withstand the impact of the information, or even become a vegetable. All sorts of meaningless information flashed before Feng Xingjian, and he casually stuffed them into his brain. Just then, footsteps rang out behind him. Through Feng Xingjian's heaven's perception, he could sense that it was a young man with long red hair. He grinned as he looked at Feng Xingjian and said, "Little brother, are you all right? A sacred land with such a high density isn't a place where you can come and go as you please." Feng Xingjian shook his head, indicating that he was fine. He stood up, intending to head deeper in. The higher the density of ether particles, the more information there would be, and the more options there would be for the job transition. The red-haired young man patted Feng Xingjian's shoulder and said, "I think you should just forget about it. Speaking of which, you can't even stand up. How did you get approved to enter such a deep, sacred place? And I don't think I've seen you before. Are you a newbie? Why do you keep your eyes closed? Do you want to call a doctor? Since you look so uncomfortable, it's better if you don't go in. If you can't concentrate, how are you going to cultivate? When it comes to cultivation, you have to let nature take its course. As the tide rises, the boat will rise. How can you be as reckless as you are? Shut up." Fong Xingjian felt that the red-haired young man's mouth was like 500 ducks. He could not help but interrupt him with a cold expression. Go do what you should be doing. Don't come and bother me. The red-haired young man shrugged and was about to say something when another purple-haired lady walked over. She looked at Fong Xingjian, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, smiled and said, "Another newbie who overestimates himself?" Thinking that his talent is unrivaled, he walked straight into the sacred place with a high density. Go back quickly. Be careful not to keep staying here, and your head might explode. Fong Xingjian could not be bothered with them. Feeling that his mind was a little more relaxed, he stood up and continued to head deeper into the sacred place. Hey, you really can't continue on. The red-haired young man frowned and said, "You're a new student, right? Has anyone reminded you? It's true that the higher the density of ether particles, the better the effects on cultivation. However, not everyone can accept such a high density at once. It's very dangerous for you to continue on like this." The purple-haired lady looked at the red-haired young man helplessly and said, "Sauron, are you going to be a busybody again? We've agreed to practice our combined attacks together today. We can't just leave him be, right?" Sauron watched as Fong Xingjian walked into the depths of the small path. He could not help but follow behind him and continue to advise, "Seeing that you're in so much pain, it's really best if you don't continue on. It's not good for your brain. You should get used to the area with 30 or 40 times density for a few days before entering." However, Fong Xingjian paid him no heed. Fong Xingjian, who possessed the world's best sword arts, had long since discovered that his willpower, courage, memory, logical abilities, and brain processing abilities far surpassed those of his peers. While ordinary people would need to spend some time to get used to the ether particle density, Fong Xingjian only needed to rest for a short period of time to get used to it. Seeing that Fong Xingjian was completely ignoring Sauron, the purple-haired lady said, "All right, don't bother about him. You can stop him once, but can you stop him forever? If he wants to court death, just let him do it." Under the purple-haired lady's tugging and tugging, Sauron was finally pulled away. However, before he left, he kept reminding Fong Xingjian not to go too deep and to call for help loudly if there was any danger. Fong Xingjian could not be bothered with them. After walking for a while, he felt that his brain was getting smoother and smoother, as if he was gradually getting used to the increase in the ether particle density. He even started to learn how to selectively accept various types of information. He accepted the useful ones and shoved the useless ones into the depths of his memories, leaving them there like rubbish. Gradually, he realized that it was as if the image quality had changed from 640 by 480 to 1920 by 1080. The images of the 10 meters around him generated in his brain with his heaven's perception were getting increasingly clearer and brighter. It was as if every inch of space within these 10 meters was extremely familiar to him, as if it was his own body. Sensing this increasingly clearer and more familiar feeling, he began to crave for more ether particles. The speed of his legs continued to increase, becoming faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, he even subconsciously activated boundaries negation. He tore through the atmosphere, creating a passageway that was close to a vacuum, and continued to advance with swooshing sounds. Sauron and the purple-haired lady, who had been walking in front, only felt a strong shock wave gushing past them. A black line streaked past their bodies, and Fong Xingjian had already disappeared from their vision. Of course, they would not be able to see Fong Xingjian's silhouette with their naked eyes. However, both of them were conferred knights, experts who had attained heaven's perception. No matter how fast Fong Xingjian was, as long as he was within 10 meters of them, they would be able to see him. This is bad. He's gone crazy. Sauron was shocked and immediately gave chase. We must stop him. If he continues charging forward like this, the density will only get higher and higher. He'll really go berserk and become a lunatic. The purple-haired lady shook her head helplessly. What bad luck. I've just returned to the sacred land, and I've already encountered such a hothead. Chapter 257. Sauron continued advancing at a fast speed while saying, Don't say that, Nina. We're all confer knights. Have you forgotten that we were also taken care of when we first came to the academy? Now that a tremendous amount of information has entered his brain can't handle the burden and he'll go berserk. If he's not careful, he'll become a complete lunatic and his life will be ruined. Nina shook her head and exerted force with her legs, increasing her speed. All right. Let's quickly catch up to him and capture him. Thankfully, this guy is just a new student and won't take much effort. Let's hurry up. The two of them were conferred knights from 2 batches ago and had already reached second transition, level 24. To them, capturing a new student was as easy as catching a chick. They increased their speed rapidly, bringing about streams of whirlwinds and whistling sounds as they charged forward. However, they realized that there was no sign of Feng Xingjian. A hint of astonishment flashed in their eyes. They exchanged a glance, and a series of loud sounds rang out under their feet. Streams of air currents soared into the sky as they increased their speed once again. In the blink of an eye, they had reached 5 times that of supersonic speed, but there was still no sign of Feng Xingjian. Sauron let out a roar and turned into a tornado, rushing toward the depths of the sacred land. At the same time, he shouted while using his reduced force field to tremble the air. I'll go up and take a look. I'll wait for you up ahead. With a loud rumble, the path under their feet exploded, and countless sand and gravel flew up. Sauron gradually disappeared from Nina's sight. However, the two of them were too fast. Although Sauron had overtaken them very quickly, Nina caught up to him very quickly after a short while. It was because Sauron had already stopped. Nina shouted, "What's going on? Where's that guy? You didn't catch him?" Sauron frowned and pointed to the front of the path. Nina took a look and was about to walk in when Sauron pulled her back. "What's wrong? Aren't you the one who wants to save him?" Nina looked at Sauron with a puzzled expression and asked, "Why aren't you chasing him anymore?" Sauron pointed to the road sign and said, "We're now in an area with an ether particle density of 69 times. If we continue forward, we'll be in an area with an ether particle density of 70 times and above. We haven't received permission to enter yet." "What's 69 times?" Nina looked at the road sign in surprise and said, "But we didn't catch up with that fella on the way. Did he run into the forest?" Sauron shook his head and said, "That's impossible. If he rushed into the forest, he would immediately be attacked by the power left by the sages of the past. If he rushed into the forest, we would have seen him already. So he found the house and hid in it. 50 to 70 times the density is the most sought-after area. There are very few empty houses there, so he had to rush into an empty house by chance. Besides, we were chasing him so closely. How could we not see him doing the handover procedures? If you wanted to enter every empty house in the Holy Land, you had to go through the handover procedures with the nearby guardian beasts. These beasts had to confirm your identity and intention to stay in the empty house. Only then would they remember you, protect you, and expel other people who wanted to enter the house to protect your cultivation. Nina said impatiently, "This is impossible. That is also impossible." "Then what exactly is it?" "There's only one possibility. That kid's speed is so fast that he can easily shake us off, and he also has the authority to enter the Holy Land after the 70-fold density." Sauron smiled helplessly. "This new student is really not simple. We've cared for the wrong person. He's much more powerful than us." The new students these days know how to play the pig to eat the tiger at such a young age. Nina said fiercely, "Do you remember his appearance? Go back and check who on earth this kid is." Feng Xingjian dashed out fiercely, charging into the deepest part of the Holy Land, the center where the ether particle density had reached 100 times. This was a valley with lush grass and pleasant scenery. There were many small lakes scattered in the valley, and over 10 villas had been built here. Moreover, with the ether particles density being 100 times higher than normal, the ether particles here contained even more information. This was especially so, as there had been many top-notch conferred knights cultivating here over the years. With just a casual breath, Feng Xingjian could feel that there seemed to be sword and fist theories gushing into his body. wielding the sword, drawing ghosts and gods. Without a source of power, how can I perform arts? My fist advances forward with indomitable will, without regrets, loyalty, faith, honor, courage. Before a strong enemy, there is no fear. Courageous and loyal, with a clear conscience. Gung Zheng bluntly says that he would rather die than submit. Protecting the weak, there's no justice in this world. All sorts of concepts, martial arts, and martial techniques turned into streams of information, gushing into Fang Xingjian's mind without him knowing. He had no choice but to get rid of those that he was not to his liking, leaving behind those that were useful to him. The entire Holy Land had been maintained for 200 years, and over these 200 years, countless outstanding and talented conferred knights had cultivated here. As they absorbed the information and energy from the ether particles, they had also left behind their own information and energy. This was like a great treasure trove, accumulating the experiences and powers of countless top-notch experts. Fang Xingjian felt that he had only stayed here for a few minutes, but the bottleneck for his sword arts, which had not improved for a long time, seemed to have started to loosen. It was no wonder that so many conferred knights wanted to enter the Holy Land with a density of 100 times. This was a paradise for cultivators. Fang Xingjian lifted his head and looked at those villas. Each of these villas had been imbued with the power of ether particles, allowing them to endlessly absorb the ether particles in the entire Holy Land for offense and defense, ensuring the safety of the people in the villa in their cultivation. When every conferred knight was cultivating, they would be in a state where they would forget about everything else. Therefore, their consciousness will be focused on the content of their cultivation. Therefore, there would naturally be a need for heavy protection. There were a total of 16 villas in the entire valley. This was a number that the Academy had calculated so that the Holy Land would not be wasted, and neither would the density of ether particles be reduced due to too many people cultivating here. There were similar restrictions on the number of people in the entire Holy Land. Out of the 16 villas, 15 of them were encompassed by various lights. Clearly, the defensive powers in them had been activated, ceaselessly engulfing and spitting out ether particles, causing the frequency of waves to change and producing all sorts of visible light. The remaining villa was naturally left for Fang Xingjian. Fang Xingjian walked into the villa and discovered that although it had not been cleaned for a very long time, there was not a single speck of dust or any signs of aging. Fang Xingjian had been informed by the maid in advance that the cleanliness of the entire Holy Land, as well as the delivery of meals, were all done by the guardian ferocious beasts. Therefore, although no ordinary people came in, the conferred knights who were here to cultivate did not need to place their energy on trivial matters. Fang Xingjian threw a glance, and then found the training room in the villa. He sat down and started to regulate his breathing, slowly accepting the information from the ether particles, searching for information related to the second transition. As his thoughts gradually calmed down, he slowly captured the information regarding the second transition, bit by bit, and they flowed into his brain. Chapter 258. After stillness, there would be calmness, and after stillness, there would be wisdom. As Fang Xingjian's thoughts grew increasingly calm, all of his consciousness gradually withdrew from his body and focused on gathering information regarding the second transition jobs. More and more information regarding the second transition gushed into his brain. Tempest Overlord, Gale Sword Deity, Aurora Sword Spirit, Astral Sword Saint, Darkness of Death. Information regarding the second transition popped up one after another. All of them were jobs that Fang Xingjian had fulfilled the job requirements. Under Fang Xingjian's heaven's perception, they were like transparent screens that appeared in Fang Xingjian's surroundings. On the screens, there were all sorts of images and sounds formed from countless information. They were the various performances of those jobs when they were battling, cultivating, and releasing their skills. Fang Xingjian could sense that as long as he focused his consciousness on that screen, he would choose that job to go through the job transition. The secrets of all the second transition jobs were in the ether particles. At this stage, Fang Xingjian's understanding of ether particles seemed to have deepened. Actually, in the usual space, be it at the seaside, in the valleys, or on the plains, as long as one calmed down and put in effort to search for information regarding the second transition jobs, one would be able to go through the job transition. It was just that the density of ether particles in the usual space was too low. Limited by the density and type of ether particles, one would be able to sense the second transition jobs differently. Therefore, everyone had to come to the sacred land, where the density of ether particles was the highest, to go through the job transition. Only there would they be able to receive the most complete and abundant information regarding the second transition. As the second transition jobs appeared one after another, the few jobs that Fang Xingjian had high hopes for in the past also appeared. Finally, the second transition job at the pinnacle of the swordsman category, the job that all swordsmen dreamed of, worked tirelessly, and would die for, the unparalleled Sword Supreme, appear before Fang Xingjian. Stars, atmosphere, darkness, high speed. Although I know all of these, they're not what I'm really good at. The reason why I'm able to grasp all these powers is because of my sword arts talent. My strongest, most fundamental, and most powerful aspect is still my own sword arts. So, as Fang Xingjian pondered, his consciousness gradually focused on the unparalleled Sword Overlord option. However, at the next moment, he sensed an aura that was even fiercer, sharper, and seemingly even more irresistible and unstoppable. Fang Xingjian focused his consciousness and scanned it out, continuing to delve deeper and deeper. It was as if he had entered the deepest part of the sea of information. Finally, he sensed another job in the deepest part of the information flow. Heavenly Sword Sovereign, live for the sword, die for the sword, and be a sword for the sword. Strength growth, 10. Speed growth, 10. Reaction growth, 10. Endurance growth, 10. Flexibility growth, 10. After the class advancement, they would obtain 4 major specialties. Namely, Swordless said, swordsmen shouldn't lose to their bare hands. Grass, wood, bamboo, and rocks can all be used as swords. They can use the power of ether particles to strengthen any ordinary weapons in their hands, temporarily strengthening them to the level of a level 19 inferior divine weapon. They will be useless after they leave their hands. Sword bones. Sword bones are naturally formed. All the Hotian bones in the body will gradually turn into Xiantian sword bones, strengthening the toughness of the bones. Under the nourishment of endless sword intense, the toughness of the materials will be raised to the level of a divine weapon of the same level. Containing sword intense, each punch and kick will turn into the force of a sword thrust or slash. This was what it meant to raise the toughness of one's bones to the level of a divine weapon without any forging. For example, when Fang Xingjian was at level 20, the toughness of his bones would be able to reach the level of a level 20 superior divine weapon. When he punched or kicked out, all the blunt force would be turned into the force of a sword slash. This was equivalent to increasing the toughness and destructive prowess of Fang Xingjian's body. Darkness sword sense. Although you've lost your vision, pure darkness will allow you to focus even more on pursuing the supreme profoundness of sword arts. You can sense the waves and profoundness of ether particles, and your sword arts cultivation speed will be doubled. The cultivation speed of all sword arts related to ether particles will also be doubled. Heavenly Sword Imprint. The profoundness of all sword arts in the world is hidden in your body. The maximum level of all sword arts will be increased by 10 levels. The 4 specialties, Swordless Path, Sword Bones, Darkness Sword Sense, and Heavenly Sword Imprint. Each of them was stronger and more terrifying than the last. What moved Fang Xingjian the most was that the growth of this job had reached 10 points in each of the 5 major attributes. However, there were no other waves or mental cultivation methods. There were only 4 extremely monstrous specialties. This was even stronger and more amazing. It was even more suitable for Fang Xingjian's second transition job than the unparalleled Sword Supreme. Moreover, this was something that he had not managed to find when he was looking up information on second transition jobs. If someone were to tell Feng Xingjian at this moment that the unparalleled Sword Supreme was the pinnacle job for second transition swordsmen, he would definitely scoff at it. Then, I'll choose you. At the next moment, Feng Xingjian felt that all of his consciousness was focused on the heavenly sword sovereign's information. All sorts of energy gushed toward him along with the information drilling into his brain. Feng Xingjian felt that his body seemed to be connected to the outside world. The ether particles in his body continued to exchange with the ether particles in the outside world, exchanging information and exchanging energy. In these exchanges, his body was changing bit by bit, bit by bit. Comprehension of one's thoughts sometimes only needed an instant, but the strengthening of one's physical body required a tremendous amount of physical foundation. The changes of the second transition was a super evolution of the human body. After one's brain had progressed to the level of heaven's perception, it would absorb a tremendous amount of information and energy, causing the entire body to undergo an explosive strengthening. Feng Xingjian could feel that his bone structure had changed, and his brain seemed to have gone through a second round of development. Every strand of muscle, every strand of nerve, and every section of blood vessels were going through an intrinsic change. However, he had yet to penetrate his consciousness to such a fine level. He could only let his body continue to absorb information and energy, strengthening bit by bit as the information in his body grew stronger. A tremendous amount of energy was absorbed, and a tremendous amount of energy was depleted. Feng Xingjian's skin seemed to be filled with air, becoming stronger and stronger bit by bit. This went on for 10 days and 10 nights. Feng Xingjian's consciousness had completely merged into his body, and he could not feel the slightest bit of influence from the outside world. This continued until one morning, when his eyes abruptly opened. Although he had lost his vision, his pupils had become pitch black with a bottomless depth. He stood up slightly, and all the bones in his body let out crackling sounds. The joints of his spine kept on colliding against each other, releasing sounds like steel bars smashing into cement. It was as if each of his bones had changed into a different material. He then took a step forward, and with a slight push, the carpet on the ground was sliced into two. There seemed to be a sharp shock wave sweeping through the air, and when he looked at the ground again, he saw that there were many sword marks several inches deep. This was because of his sword bones. His clumsy force had been turned into a sharp force, and he was a little unable to control it. Therefore, when he moved his arms and legs, he created an extremely sharp cut. The vital energy and blood throughout his body seethed, and he was so lively as if he had just woken up. There is no sign of him deteriorating from not eating, drinking, or sleeping for the past 10 days. I've finally completed the second transition. Feng Xingjian then looked at his current attributes. As he had already reached the maximum experience level at level 19, the 10 days and 10 nights of continuous cultivation had not only allowed him to complete the second transition, but it had also allowed him to rise to level 20, truly becoming a conferred knight. Chapter 259. Right now, Feng Xingjian's attributes had changed to name, Feng Xingjian age, 17 occupation, heavenly sword sovereign level, 20 strength, 83 plus 6 agility, 192 plus 6 reaction, 87 endurance, 57 flexibility, 59 ether synchronization rate. 10% the attributes above come into effect once the prodigious astral divine powers waves is activated. Due to perfect muscles, plus 6 in strength and agility, 10% of the endurance attribute, techniques, boundaries negation, level 40 rebirth sword technique, level 40 new 9-headed dragon sword technique, level 40 luminous heaven soaring slash, ether sword ripples, level 4 ether divine art, level 190,000 godly demon flash talent, genius swordsmanship elementary survival instinct, internal healing, internal training, sword specialist, heightened reflexes, perfect muscles, single sword world, subjugation, elementary berserkness, unparalleled sword intent, apex, sword bones, swordless path, darkness sword sense, Heavenly Sword Imprint Waves Level 1 Prodigious Astral Divine Powers Waves Mental Cultivation Method Level 5 Universal Sword Dominance Lunisolar Potential 20,000 points increase /day after becoming a second transition Level 20 Heavenly Sword Sovereign. Not only did Fang Xingjian's attributes increase tremendously, his waves, the Prodigious Astral Divine Powers waves, could also start to level up, and his ether synchronization rate could continue to increase as well. Moreover, due to the special effects of the Heavenly Sword Imprint, the maximum level of his sword techniques could be increased by 10. This allowed a few of his sword techniques to have more room for improvement. A feeling of satisfaction rose in Fang Xingjian's mind. At the same time, an intense feeling of hunger came from his body. Although he had absorbed a tremendous amount of energy from ether particles over the past 10 days and nights, energy was still energy. Moreover, it had been used to modify his body. However, his stomach had not eaten for 10 days. Moreover, he had depleted a large amount of energy and felt even more hungry after the modification. However, at the next moment, this feeling was interrupted by someone else. Fang Xingjian. Xingjian? Xingjian, are you there? A male voice kept ringing out from outside the villa, entering Fang Xingjian's ears time and time again. However, Fang Xingjian could clearly tell that this person's voice did not belong to anyone he knew. However, he could not possibly let them keep making a ruckus outside. Moreover, he had completed his second transition and wanted to go out for a walk. He wanted to look for Ferdinand and the others to discuss the matter of earning money. As soon as he went out, he saw a dark-skinned man with a protruding mouth and a protruding chin. He looked unscrupulous as he stood outside the villa, looking at Fang Xingjian through the light of the protective barrier. The moment he saw Fang Xingjian, he acted as if he was very familiar with him and greeted him warmly. Xingjian, Xingjian, you're finally out. During this period of time, I've been coming to look for you twice a day, morning and night. You're finally here today. As if he was afraid that Fang Xingjian didn't know how sincere he was, he said in detail, I call you every morning and every night for half an hour. You must be very focused on your cultivation. That's why you can't hear me. At this point, there was a hint of resentment in his eyes, as if he felt that Fang Xingjian was deliberately ignoring him. However, when he took a look at Fang Xingjian's pale face, as if he had just suffered a serious illness, he calmed down a little. Fang Xingjian asked directly, Who are you? Why did you come to look for me? The student with a protruding mouth and a protruding chin grinned, hiding the resentment in his heart. He put on a fawning expression and said, Xingjian, hee, you're this year's regional champion. I've been admiring you for a long time. Seeing that there seemed to be an impatient expression on Fang Xingjian's face, he immediately introduced himself. I'm Zhou Xingwen. Just like you, we're both Westerners. I just reached level 22 a month ago and am now ranked 49th. At this point, he looked at Fang Xingjian and seemed to gain a little more confidence. Although you're an unrivaled genius, I'm still older than you and have a higher level than you, so I'm ranked higher than you. With that, he straightened his back even more as he continued. Although there are many different races living together in this world, the Empire still has to be on guard against us descendants of Westerners. Therefore, we should all join forces to ensure our own interests. The reason I've come to look for you is because I hope that you can join our Western society. You don't have to be too burdened. This is just something like a salon or a club. All of us Westerners will be participating in it. After everyone joins, we'll exchange our experiences and help each other out. We won't be bullied by those locals. Most of the Western conferred knights in the academy are all participating. What he said seemed to make a lot of sense. If Fang Xingjian was really a Westerner and had been discriminated against since young, or had been bullied by the Empire's natives, he might join this organization that was similar to a fellow countrymen's association. However, Fang Xingjian was not a Westerner. He was an earthling who had nothing to do with the entire miracle world. Moreover, his love, kinship, and friendship had been taken away from him. It was impossible to hope that he would like this Western society. Fang Xingjian shook his head and said, I'm not interested. If there's nothing else, you can leave. Zhou Xingwen was stunned for a moment, as if he had not expected Fang Xingjian to reject him so decisively. He continued, don't think too much about joining the society. It's not a political party, and it's just a club that everyone can casually join. There are no missions or superiors and subordinates. If you feel that it's not suitable, you can go and find out more about it and consider it. Our academy's 3rd-ranked Xiao Tianxia and 9th-ranked Wang Tiangang are both in the Western society. You can reconsider. There's nothing to consider. I don't have time to waste on such things. Seeing that Fang Xingjian was still unmoved, Zhou Xingwen could not help but smile awkwardly and say, it's fine. Our doors are always open for you. As he said this, a hint of fury could not help but burn in the depths of his eyes. He had not expected that Fang Xingjian would not give him any face and be so arrogant. Zhou Xingwen had wanted to talk to Fang Xingjian using the fact that they were both Westerners. However, he had not expected that Fang Xingjian would not give him any face at all. However, when he thought of the mission he had accepted, as well as the cost of being brought into an area with 100 times the density, he held back the fury in his heart. The sacred land with 100 times the density was not a place that just anyone could enter. Other than the 16 people who were training here, there were only 1 or 2 slots every day. They were in charge of inspecting the situation in the sacred land and doing some things that the guardian ferocious beasts were unable to do. After all, the guardian ferocious beasts were not humans. They were unable to do many things such as monitoring the defenses, repairing the buildings, and maintaining the vegetation. Clearly, this slot to enter the sacred land to do maintenance work was a very lucrative job. One person could only do this job for at most 15 days, and they would have to spend a huge sum of money. Therefore, Zhou Xingwen was naturally unwilling to leave just like that. He beamed at Fang Xingjian and said, Xingjian, there's actually another matter that I've come over today. It's a good thing, a very good thing. It's extremely good for both you and me. He grinned and said, I see that your face is pale and you seem a little dispirited. You must not be able to take it any more in the sacred land with 100 times the density, right? This is because you've taken too big of a stride from the start. A newcomer like you should start from 10 times the density and improve bit by bit. In history, there have been quite a number of people who were eager for quick success and entered the sacred land with too high a density right from the start. In the end, their brains were hit by a tremendous amount of information, and they went crazy and went berserk. Actually, it's not suitable for you to cultivate here. So look, I have an opportunity here. Chapter 260. Seeing that Fang Xingjian did not stop him from continuing, Zhou Xingwen continued. You see, you're not too used to a sacred land with a high density, and I know that some conferred knights have been wanting to cultivate in a sacred land with a density of 100 times. This is a good opportunity for both sides. How could Fang Xingjian possibly fall for his bewitchment so easily? His words were like his sword arts, direct and direct. Who's interested in this sacred land of mine? How much are you willing to pay? To Fang Xingjian, a sacred land was merely a place to increase his cultivation speed. However, if the other party was willing to offer a reasonable price, such as 1 million gold coins or a set of divine level armor, he would naturally be willing to give up this sacred land. Zhou Xingwen seemed to have not expected Fang Xingjian to be so direct. He was stunned for a moment before saying, It's like this. The person ranked 9th in our regional academy's rankings, Wang Tiangang, is like a god who has descended from the heavens. He's just turned 35 years old and is already a level 26 conferred knight. His white deity sword technique is renowned throughout the great western region, and he was even able to exchange 10 moves with the governor without being defeated. He's a top-notch genius. Next year will be the national selection, and Brother Tiangang hopes to make use of this last year to make a good effort. The rewards for next year's national selection have been greatly increased by His Majesty. As long as you can get into the top 10, you'll be able to soar and leave your name in history. Xingjian, although you're also a genius of your generation, you've only just entered the academy this year and won't be able to participate in next year's national selection. Moreover, you've just started your second transition cultivation and aren't suitable for the high density of ether particles. If you forcefully cultivate, your brain and spirit will be damaged like you are now. Why don't you give his chance to Brother Tiangang? He'll find a sacred land with a low density for you to cultivate in. He'll even make up for the difference. He'll definitely not let you suffer a loss. And don't worry, if you wish to go through the second transition, you can come here at any time. Brother Tiangang will definitely not stop you. Zhou Xingwen's mouth was a little dry from all the talking, but his eyes were filled with determination. After all, in his opinion, Fang Xingjian had just entered the academy, and there was still 1 year before he could participate in the national selection. Moreover, he needed time to adapt to the high density of the Holy Land. Under such circumstances, temporarily giving up the right to cultivate in the sacred land in exchange for Wang Tiangang's friendship and compensation was a good deal. Once Wang Tiangang passed the regional selection, he would definitely be indebted to Fang Xingjian. It could be said that Zhou Xingwen had considered all aspects before coming over to take on this job. In his opinion, as long as one wasn't an idiot, it was impossible for them to reject this proposal. However, what he didn't know was that Fang Xingjian was really planning to participate in the national selection a year later. Fang Xingjian asked, "What price did Wang Tiangang offer?" "Yes, Brother Heavenly Dipper." Zhou Xingwen added, "The governor has personally applied for this piece of sacred land for you, and it has been approved for a year's time. If you're willing to let Brother Tiangang have this 1 year's time, then he's willing to fork out 300,000 gold coins, including any resources that are equivalent to 300,000 gold coins. 300,000 gold coins. This was already the budget of some prefectural academies for a few years. It was also a huge sum of money that Wang Tiangang had managed to gather from various places and decades of savings. Despite this, it showed how wealthy these conferred knights in the great western city were. The wealth of a conferred knight was truly unfathomable. However, when Fang Xingjian heard this price, he frowned slightly and said, "It's too little." "Too little?" When Zhou Xingwen heard the price of 300,000 gold, he felt his mouth go dry and he was seeing stars. 300,000 gold was enough to purchase a divine weapon of level 25 and above. Even if it was used to purchase heavenly and earthly treasures, it would be enough to raise an ordinary person's attributes to that of a knight's. Or if it was used for the cultivation of a conferred knight, it could be used for a few years. To think that Fang Xingjian would say that it was too little, Zhou Xingwen immediately tried to persuade him. 300,000 gold is really not a small amount. "Xingjian, didn't your sword break in the arena? 300,000 gold is enough for you to buy a level 26 or even a level 27 superior divine weapon." Seeing that Fang Xingjian was still shaking his head, Zhou Xingwen could not help but say, 400,000. Seeing that Fang Xingjian was about to turn and leave, he immediately shouted, 500,000 gold coins! 500,000 gold coins! Zhou Xingwen, who had shouted out 500,000 gold coins as if he had just unleashed an ultimate move, looked at Fang Xingjian, panting, and said, "This is the highest price they can offer. Xingjian, don't go overboard. 500,000 gold coins is enough for you to buy a top-notch superior divine weapon or increase your attributes by tens of points." However, what made Zhou Xingwen disappointed once again was that Fang Xingjian shook his head and headed back into his house. 1 million gold coins. Tell Wang Tiangang that if he can't afford it, then don't waste my time. 1 million? Hearing this figure, Zhou Xingwen almost spat out a mouthful of blood. What kind of concept was 1 million? The number of people in the entire great western city who could fork out such a sum of money would probably not exceed 5. Moreover, they would definitely be second transition, level 29 super experts or super aristocrats who had accumulated wealth for over 100 years. Only they would be able to accumulate such a tremendous amount of wealth. To Zhou Xingwen, Fang Xingjian's actions were like a lion opening its mouth and asking for a sky-high price. He could not help but shout out, "Xingjian, there's no way you'll be able to sell it at this price. Are you going to let this sacred land rot in your hands?" A newbie like you won't be able to persevere in training for too long in the sacred land, where the density is 100 times. If you let it rot in your hands, you might as well use it to exchange for more resources. Moreover, I believe that other than Brother Tiangang, no one else will be able to offer a price higher than 500,000 gold coins. Ignoring Zhou Xingwen's long-winded words, Fang Xingjian returned to his room. He still needed to look for something to eat. Having not eaten for 10 days, his intestines and stomach had shrunk together. Looking at Fang Xingjian's back slowly disappearing through the door, a hint of fury flashed in Zhou Xingwen's eyes. Thinking of how he had boasted to Wang Tiangang earlier on that he would definitely get this done, Zhou Xingwen felt a little anger rising up in his body. This lad is really as unrestrained as the rumors say, doing as he pleases. He really doesn't know anything about how to conduct himself. Thinking of this, Zhou Xingwen let out a breath and left with a face full of hatred. However, thinking of the money he had spent in order to enter the sacred land, he wore a pained expression. That damned Fang Xingjian. You're not even willing to let go of 500,000 gold coins. Aren't you afraid that you'll die from overeating? You can just continue guarding this sacred land. I'll see how long you can last after being bombarded by information currents every day. Zhou Xingwen thought of how Fang Xingjian was getting weaker and how he had suffered from a nervous breakdown when he first entered the sacred land where the density was 30 times, causing him to suffer from insomnia. He secretly made up his mind. I might as well look for him again next time. I don't believe that he'll be able to last much longer. Maybe the next time I come here, he'll have a headache, and I won't even need to spend 500,000 gold. Fang Xingjian could not guess Zhou Xingwen's thoughts at all. He had not expected that the first generation of Miracle World's harassment-type intermediary would be forced out just like that. He was holding a large plate of food in the small room and eating nonstop, circulating his vital energy and blood, gradually recovering the vitality of his internal organs. Chapter 261. As Fang Xingjian ate, he continued to ponder in his mind. The main cultivation for conferred knights was to synthesize killing techniques, increase their ether synchronization rate, and then increase their level. As for the other aspects, such as tempering attributes and cultivating techniques, they were no different from first transition knights. The cultivation of conferred knights is only based on my own conjectures and the information I've read in the past. However, the regional academy can be said to be the frontline battlefield for conferred knights, and the theories here should be the most advanced. If there's a chance, I should look for some classes to attend and understand how the conferred knights in the regional academy cultivate. As Fang Xingjian thought of all these, he continued to eat a large, ferocious wild boar, mouthful by mouthful, and continued to make noises. I'll head out first to look for Ferdinand and see how it's more convenient to earn money. I'll then find a few classes to attend and see how I should allocate my time for the cultivation of killing techniques and the cultivation of ether synchronization rate in the sacred land. While he was thinking, Fang Xingjian had already finished eating 3 roasted ferocious wild boars, an entire bear-hug bison, and 3 pots of vegetable salad filled with countless herbs. He wiped his mouth, and with a move of his body, he had already flashed out of the door. Due to the change in force caused by the sword bone, his footsteps were accompanied by bursts of sword chi. With every step he took, long sword marks would appear on the ground, as if the ground was about to be cut open. He continued to walk, and in the blink of an eye, he arrived outside the sacred land. He could feel the density of the ether particles dropping rapidly, and the image in his mind seemed to have changed from 1920x1080 to 640 by 480. He felt slightly unaccustomed. However, at the next moment, when he walked past the exit of the sacred land, he saw a young maid waiting there. When she saw him, she shouted, "May I know if you're Lord Fang Xingjian?" "That's me. What's the matter?" As if she had never met such a young and handsome conferred knight before, the maid blushed slightly and said a little shyly, "Your divine armor has arrived. It's the reward for the regional selection. The overseer sent me here to wait for you, to collect it the moment you come out." "Has the level 29 set arrived?" Fang Xingjian asked. "Where is it? Please come with me. It's in the office of the director." When the director found out about the things inside, he didn't even dare to take half a step away from it. "You're finally here today." The maid immediately led the way in front of them. Her footsteps were light, and her legs were powerful, almost comparable to those of the Olympic champions on Earth. It was obvious that in the regional academy, even the maids were diligently practicing martial arts and had sufficient nutrition. However, her speed was still too slow for Feng Xingjian. Therefore, at the next moment, she only felt that her body had become slightly lighter. Then she felt a strong arm wrap around her waist, and she was already moving forward at a rapid speed, as if she was flying. Feng Xingjian's voice echoed in her ears, "Show me the way." The young maid only felt that Feng Xingjian's arm was extremely strong and warm. Thinking that this was the regional selections champion, the genius who had comprehended 7 levels of the Pantheon Monument's mysteries, and who had even defeated a divine-level disciple, her heartbeat quickened uncontrollably. She let out a soft moan and agreed. Feng Xingjian led the maid and walked very quickly. In just a short 2 minutes, they had arrived before the 3-story building. The maid in his arms was like a squirrel, burying her entire head into Feng Xingjian's arm. Feng Xingjian's voice rang out. "We've arrived? This is the place?" The maid seemed to have woken up from a dream and said in a low voice, Suddenly, she felt his arm move slightly. She immediately realized that she had been hugging his arm without letting go. 2 lines of red rose from her cheeks. She took 2 steps back and said, I'm sorry. However, when she lifted her head to look again, Feng Xingjian was nowhere to be seen. Another maid came out and looked at her with a smirk, saying, "Xiaoru, who was that? He's so handsome." Now that Feng Xingjian had completed the second transition, he had once again undergone a complete transformation. In addition to the 1 year of cultivation he had spent in the first transition, his disposition had changed. He was like an unsheathed sharp sword, and under the subtle changes in his bones and muscles, he was now very good-looking. Hearing her companion's teasing, Xiaoru lowered her head and said, "It's Lord Feng Xingjian." "Huh? He's that Feng Xingjian? Seriously, why is he so good-looking?" The maid said with her mouth agape, "So young, so good-looking, and a conferred knight. Sigh, if only he's willing to marry me." Xiaoru covered her mouth and laughed. "What nonsense are you spouting?" "I'm spouting nonsense." That maid patted Xiaoru's shoulder and said, "Sigh, can't you see who was the one acting coquettishly earlier? She was hugging onto someone else's arm and refused to let go. What a vixen." Xiaoru and this maid were clearly used to joking around and did not hold back when they spoke. Hearing that, Xiaoru laughed and scolded the maid. "You're the slut, you're the vixen." Just as the two of them were laughing and scolding each other, Feng Xingjian had already walked past the 3-story building and arrived at the superintendent's office on the 3rd floor. The regional academy's superintendent was mainly in charge of logistics, food, hygiene, as well as the maintenance of various buildings, plants, rearing of ferocious beasts, and many other things. Although he was in charge of miscellaneous matters, since the people involved were all conferred knights, it was naturally a lucrative job. He was also the superior of all the maids, servants, cooks, gardeners, and the others in the academy, managing thousands of people. That was right. The total number of teachers and students in the academy did not even reach 100, but there were several thousand servants serving them. It was only on such a scale that they could ensure that every corner of the academy would be cleaned at least 3 times a day, and that every meal would be a delicacy. No matter what the confer knights wanted, it would be delivered within half an hour. There might not be a spirit of service in the miracle world, but all the servants would serve the conferred knights as if they were their masters. This was a level of professionalism that far surpassed any other service industry on Earth. When Feng Xingjian entered the superintendent's office, he saw an elderly man sitting behind his desk. Next to him was a huge metal box that was taller than a person's height. Seeing that Feng Xingjian had arrived, he let out a breath and said, "You're finally here. This thing is placed in my office every day, causing me to not even dare to sleep. Even when I go to the toilet, I have to get someone to watch over it." The elderly man was the regional academy's superintendent, a knight in his 60s. He no longer had any desire to improve himself, and so he was rather diligent in managing the Academy's affairs. However, a few days ago, two confer knights had sent over the rewards for the regional selection. One of them was Fang Xingjian's level 29 superior divine weapon armor. What kind of valuable item was this? It was priceless. Logically speaking, the regional academy could be considered to be extremely safe. However, the superintendent still could not feel at ease looking at this set of armor. However, Fang Xingjian was in a state of cultivation, and no one could call him out. Therefore, the superintendent could only stay in his office every day, watching over the huge metal box next to him. How torturous was this? He had to suppress his curiosity toward the divine weapon, but he also had to constantly worry that someone would set their eyes on it, afraid that it would be lost in his hands. He had applied to Governor Devitt to send a conferred knight over to watch over the divine weapon a few times. However, Governor Devitt was very confident in the regional academy's safety and did not approve of it. One could imagine how great the pressure was for a knight to watch over such an unparalleled treasure. Chapter 262. The superintendent was under a lot of pressure. However, now that Fang Xingjian had finally arrived, he no longer had to bear the responsibility. He walked up enthusiastically, looked at Fang Xingjian, and said, "Xingjian, you're finally here. Come. Quickly put on this armor, and let me see what it looks like. It's also the first time I've seen a level 29 armor." Fang Xingjian walked up to the top of the big metal box, and under the superintendent's instructions, he inserted the knight emblem that he had been wearing around his neck into a hole in the metal box. The entire metal box seemed to tremble slightly. Then at the next moment, as a large amount of white gas spurted out, the entire metal box opened up like a blooming flower, revealing a set of armor that stood upright within. The entire armor was dark black, including the hands, arms, waist, legs, thighs, knees, calves, and other parts. If he were to put on all of them, it would be a set of black armor that covered his entire body. He stood quietly in the metal box, looking just like a living knight. There was nothing special about him, but he had a unique aura. Therefore, under the superintendent's envious gaze, Fang Xingjian put on the entire set of armor one after another. At the start, Fang Xingjian had been worried that this set of armor would be too heavy and break his specialty, single sword world subjugation. This specialty did not allow one to equip armor that weighed more than 10 kilograms. Otherwise, one would not be able to obtain his acceleration. However, when he put it on, he realized that this level 29 superior divine armor was as light as a feather, as if it were made of paper. However, its sturdiness was not to be underestimated. Right now, Fang Xingjian had transitioned to the heavenly sword sovereign, and all the bones throughout his body had turned into sword bones. Each of his punches and kicks was like a long sword slashing and piercing. With just a casual tap of his finger, he would be able to break steel and pierce through steel armor. However, when his finger brushed past the surface of the armor, although there was an intense sound of metal rubbing against each other, he was unable to leave any marks on it. The superintendent said enviously, "This set of armor is known as the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor. It was forged from the corpse of the Sand Country's national hero, Damarov, after 10 years. It's truly a rare treasure. Just the material alone is already as light as a feather, yet as hard as a boulder. Even a level 29 divine weapon wouldn't be able to break it easily." In the blink of an eye, Fang Xingjian had already put on the black Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor. At the next moment, the entire armor trembled slightly and turned into a layer of black liquid, adhering onto Fang Xingjian's body. It was as if a layer of skin was sticking onto his skin. Then the color of the armor kept on changing, as if it was gradually getting used to Fang Xingjian's physique. In the blink of an eye, it had continuously changed over 10 colors, and in the end, it was getting closer and closer to Fang Xingjian's own skin color. In the end, there were no traces of the armor at all. Fang Xingjian moved his arms and legs, unable to feel that he was wearing a set of armor. This heavenly abyss annihilation armor was truly amazing. The superintendent said with an envious expression, "It said that once this heavenly abyss annihilation armor is put on, it's as if you're wearing a layer of skin. Usually, you won't be able to sense its existence at all. It will absorb sunlight, moonlight, geomagnetic forces, as well as heat, continuously metabolizing them on the surface of your body, helping to regulate your body and even strengthening your physique bit by bit. From then on, you won't be able to sweat anymore. You'll be warm in the winter and cool in the summer, and your body won't even be stained with a single speck of dust. Although I've heard of this before, I've always thought that it was an exaggeration. To think that it's actually true." The superintendent stared at Fang Xingjian's skin and mumbled, "It's already integrated into your body. Right now, your skin already has the defensive prowess of a level 29 divine weapons material. Moreover, if you were to continue wearing it for a long period of time, with the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor helping to regulate your body and strengthen your physique, even if you don't train, your body will get stronger and stronger, gradually approaching the level of a level 29 conferred knight's physique." Fang Xingjian tried to pinch his palm. He could feel that this additional layer of skin was like a living creature, becoming increasingly connected to his body. It was continuously supporting his body's metabolism, delivering nutrients, and strengthening his physique. The old man said, "It can even store the excess energy you eat to strengthen yourself. No matter how much you eat in the future, you won't have to worry about not being able to digest it." Fang Xingjian nodded and asked, "Does it have any other functions? Other than the defensive prowess of the material and the ability to adhere to the skin, what other functions do it have?" "The Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor is still asleep." The superintendent grinned and said, "This was forged from the corpse of the Sand Country's national hero. It contains the martial will that he had accumulated over the years. Right now, it's as if he's in a state of deep sleep. He can only rely on the defensive prowess of the material, as well as some basic body maintenance and conditioning abilities. Only when he truly wakes up will he be able to engulf the power of the ether particles and unleash the true prowess of a level 29 divine weapon." Martial will was the information left behind in the ether particles by experts. It was just like the information left behind in the Pantheon Monument by the divine level expert, the melancholic monarch, which had not faded even after 200 years. This Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor was forged from the bones of a level 29 expert. Therefore, the ether particles within it naturally contained a large amount of martial will, as well as the will and memories of the deceased. The superintendent said, "In order to truly activate the powers of the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor, one would need to be able to subdue the martial will within it, the will of the Sand Country's national hero, Damarov." Fang Xingjian knew that in order to defeat the martial will, one would need to be able to accept the impact of the other party's information, as well as the information left behind in the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor. Those were all Damarov's personal information. They were gathered in the armor like a remnant soul, continuously attacking everyone who disturbed them. Fang Xingjian touched his skin and said, "Be careful. I want to test out this old man's prowess." "What? You're going to challenge the martial will in the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor right now? What kind of joke was this?" How long had it been since Fang Xingjian had entered the regional academy? The superintendent had even thought that Fang Xingjian had not gone through a job transition and was still a level 19 knight. If he were to challenge the martial will of a level 29 expert under such circumstances, wouldn't he be courting death? Moreover, the superintendent was right next to Fang Xingjian. If Fang Xingjian were to not be able to withstand the impact of Damarov's martial will and go crazy, would he not be in trouble as well? However, what the superintendent did not know was that Fang Xingjian had the world's top sword arts talent. However, Fang Xingjian himself already understood that regardless of whether it was his will talent or his brain's ability to accept or process, they all far surpassed that of ordinary people. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for him to adapt to the density of ether particles so quickly. Therefore, Before the superintendent could continue to persuade Fong Xingjian, Fong Xingjian trembled slightly, and his heaven's perception sunk into the armor he was wearing. At the next moment, an overwhelming aura soared into the sky, and the temperature in the entire office started to rise. It was as if the good weather had suddenly turned into a scorching desert in summer. The superintendent could even have the illusion that the sun was shining high up in the sky, his skin was burning hot, and the wind was blowing against his face. Simultaneously, an extremely deep and majestic voice rang out from Fong Xingjian's body. It was the sound produced by the vibrations in the air caused by the armor. "Who is it? Who crawled into my head? Someone has entered my Damarov's consciousness." The superintendent's eyes opened wide, and it was only at the next moment that he reacted. This is a reaction of martial will. A tremendous amount of personal information has been gathered together, forming a fake personality. Does he think that he's not dead yet? Chapter 263. Just as Fong Xingjian was using his heaven's perception to gain a deeper understanding of the heavenly abyss annihilation armor, a tremendous amount of information gushed into his brain from the heavenly abyss annihilation armor. Practicing martial arts in his youth, the Sand Country's customs and practices, various battles of various sizes, rising above the many warriors and becoming the country's hero, advancing continuously in his martial arts and getting stronger. Damarov's entire life appeared before Fong Xingjian as if he was viewing flowers on horseback. As an expert at the pinnacle of level 29, his remains contained a tremendous amount of his personal information, forming his own martial will. When Fong Xingjian's consciousness came into contact with this information, they were like cats who had smelled blood, gushing out wildly toward this connection point. After all, to these memories, the brain and human consciousness were what they liked the most. As the information gushed in crazily, Fong Xingjian grabbed his head, feeling as if his entire brain was going to explode. A tremendous amount of memory information continued to occupy the surface of his memories, as if wanting to take over his brain. It was as if Damarov was going to be reborn in his body. Fong Xingjian's mouth opened, and an unfamiliar voice and language came out. It was the Sand Country's language, Damarov. Simultaneously, a scorching, vast, and dry aura kept on gushing out from his body. It was as if Damarov had really come back to life. However, at the next moment, the universal sword dominance lunisolar mental cultivation method in Fong Xingjian's mind circulated at full power. His consciousness was like streams of sword cheese, continuously slashing and erasing the incoming information currents. This meant that he had to rely on his will to fight against the will. Once he was unable to withstand the impact of Damarov's remnant information and allowed them to take over the surface of Fong Xingjian's consciousness, it would be like hypnosis. Fong Xingjian's brain would think that he was Damarov, or he might even develop multiple personalities. From a certain perspective, Damarov could be considered to have been resurrected. However, to Fong Xingjian, this was a disaster. It was what Miracle World called going berserk. Therefore, when the steward saw the rising aura, his eyes flashed with worry and fear, and he walked towards the door step by step. He knew that it was useless to say anything to the other party at this time. If the speed of information flowing into the brain was 100 meters per second, then the speed of information transmitted through words was at most 3 byte/s. That was the difference between a large river and a small water pipe. The two could not be compared at all. How could he persuade the other party to come back? The only thing he could think of now was to quickly retreat and preserve his life. He had seen Fong Xingjian's matches, and he knew that he was far from being a match for him. I've got to get out and find another conferred knight to restrain him. However, Fong Xingjian could not be bothered about what the superintendent was thinking. He had already gathered all of his consciousness and was going up against Damarov's martial will. It was as if he was standing on a reef, withstanding wave after wave of attacks from the information waves. At the same time, he slashed his sword into the sea again and again, reducing the incessant flow of information before him into ashes. Relying on his willpower and brain vigor, which was rare in the world, Fang Xingjian forcibly withstood the impact from Damarov's will. His disposition and aura also slowly returned to their original state. At the next moment, the skin all over his body trembled and changed, turning into a set of black armor. Then the armor went through a series of transformations, turning from inconspicuous black armor into a set of faint golden armor that reflected a metallic glow. The surface of the armor, which had originally been a single piece, turned into scales that were connected together. It was as if Fang Xingjian had put on a layer of dragon scales. The surface of the armor seemed to have turned into a crystalline mirror, and the light it reflected was like flames jumping about on the armor. Fang Xingjian felt as if countless hidden spaces had been opened up in his body. All sorts of radiation, magnetism, solar and lunar forces, heat energy from various substances, and all sorts of energy were being drawn out violently and endlessly from void space, channeling into his body. The vital energy and blood throughout his body were like boiling water. Fang Xingjian could not help but open his mouth and let out a long roar. The scales all over his body stood up abruptly, shaking the air and releasing a series of roars. Endless power gushed out incessantly from his body, and Fang Xingjian could feel that all of his physical attributes seemed to be increasing at a crazy rate. Simultaneously, streams of faint white glow appeared from Fang Xingjian's hands, feet, and other parts of his body, forming many geometric figures. They were force fields that could increase one's speed, increase one's strength, adjust one's accuracy, auto-calibrate, etc. These force fields once again increased Fang Xingjian's destructive prowess. Sensing the overwhelming changes in his body, Fang Xingjian subconsciously wanted to test out the power of this set of armor. Therefore, he casually punched out. To begin with, his strength was already very strong. Now that it had been transformed by his sword bones, the force of his punch was sufficient to produce a stream of sword chi, which could slash a hole in an ordinary wall. However, after activating the power of the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor, the power throughout his body continued to multiply. As he punched out across space, the violent power turned into sword force, tearing through the air and turning into a stream of sword chi that was 3 meters wide and 100 meters long. It whizzed out and soared into the sky, slashing the office's roof into two, revealing a large area of the sky. This power, is this the power of a peak level 29 conferred knight? To think that a casual punch or kick would have such prowess. However, Fang Xingjian soon sensed that his consciousness was on the verge of collapsing. Damarov's martial will kept on pounding at his heart from afar, as if wanting to kick him out from his physical body. Letting out a deep breath, Fang Xingjian cut off the connection between their consciousness. At the next moment, the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor on his body kept on changing and degenerating, once again turning into a layer of skin. Fang Xingjian also felt that his body was very weak, as if it was leaking air. In fact, he was not weaker than before. It was just that he had broken away from the powerful state he had been in after the activation of the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor. Comparing the two, he felt that his body was very weak. However, this weakness was just an illusion. Letting out a breath, Fang Xingjian looked at his body once again and thought to himself, "My body is still too weak when compared to those who are truly strong." Moreover, the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor only has 50% of a conferred knight's powers at most. He clenched his fists tightly, and the desire to increase his abilities grew stronger. However, before reaching level 29, this Heavenly Abyss Annihilation Armor is indeed a very powerful defense. It's a pity that I'll need to withstand the impact of Damarov's consciousness. With my current martial will, I'll only be able to hold on for over 10 seconds. Any longer, and I'll be in danger of being taken down by him. Even ordinary conferred knights might not be able to withstand the impact of his will. Fang Xingjian secretly decided that he would continue to strengthen his sword arts and mental cultivation method. With a stronger cultivation, he would be more confident, his brain would be more developed, and he would also be able to withstand the impact of his will. When he was able to completely suppress Damarov's martial will, he would be able to use this heavenly abyss annihilation armor freely. It would not be like now, where he had to stop after using it for over 10 seconds and let his consciousness rest for a few hours before he could continue using it. Just as Fang Xingjian was thinking about this, a voice rang out in the office, Xing. Jian, are you all right? Chapter 264. The superintendent looked at Fang Xingjian with some worry and fear. If it was not for the fact that Fang Xingjian had become this year's regional champion and that his performance had far surpassed that of the previous regional champions, if it was not for the fact that Fang Xingjian had kept the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation armor he was wearing, he would definitely not have stayed behind to ask Fang Xingjian this question. Hearing the superintendent's words, Fang Xingjian finally lifted his head and put on an apologetic expression, saying, "I'm sorry for damaging your office. It's fine, it's fine." With that, the superintendent heaved a sigh of relief. Thankfully, there were no major problems. However, he immediately looked at Fang Xingjian with a curious and envious gaze, saying, "Subdued the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation armor? Subdued? How can it be so easy? It contains the absolute will of a level 29 pinnacle expert, Damarov. It's not something that I can subdue and suppress right now. Right now, I can at most withstand the impact of his will and use it for a short while." Fang Xingjian thought, a level 29 armor is already so powerful. Then how powerful would a level 30 divine level armor, which is said to possess 30% of a divine level expert's powers be? For some reason, the superintendent seemed to heave a sigh of relief after hearing Fang Xingjian's words. However, his eyes were still filled with envy. That's already very impressive. Using a level 29 armor for a short while, you're already able to unleash half of a level 29 expert's powers, right? How can it be so easy? Fang Xingjian smiled. A level 29 expert's power comes from various aspects: killing techniques, specialties, attributes, waves, mental cultivation methods. Not a single one of them can be lacking. The Heavenly Abyss Annihilation armor has only strengthened my 5 attributes. As for its other abilities, I still need to continue exploring them, continuously resisting Damarov's martial will before I can truly unleash them. The Heavenly Abyss Annihilation armor did not just simply increase one's physical strength. However, many of its abilities were not something that the current Fang Xingjian could fully grasp. Even so, it was already very impressive. At the very least, during the 10 or so seconds when he was using the Heavenly Abyss Annihilation armor, all conferred knights below level 25 would probably not be a match for him. Fang Xingjian replied apologetically, "It's my fault for the ceiling. I'll get someone to send money to pay for it." Not only was Fang Xingjian the regional champion, but he was also Governor Devitt's favorite. Even if he was not on good terms with the first prince, he was not someone the superintendent, a mere level 19 knight, could go up against. Although he knew that Fang Xingjian was just being polite, his words still made the manager feel very comfortable. There's no need for that. It's just a small matter. There's no need to take it to heart. Yes, but I still have something to do today, so I have to leave first. Although the superintendent's attitude was very humble, Fang Xingjian still maintained the necessary politeness. He knew that a person like the superintendent, who was in charge of the logistics of the entire regional academy, might not be able to help him a lot. However, if he wanted to cause trouble and hold Fang Xingjian back, he would be able to do it easily. To be able to exchange a few polite words for the goodwill of others. There was nothing more worthwhile than this. After bidding farewell to the smiling superintendent, Fang Xingjian headed out of the academy. He was going to look for Ferdinand to discuss the matter of earning money. No matter what, he was still the regional champion, and he was also the person who had defeated the divine level student, Holt. Based on what was said on Earth, this brand of his was still very marketable in the Great Western region. Through this, he would be able to earn a lot of money even if he were to open supplementary classes. However, he would still need to spend a long period of time cultivating in the sacred land. Therefore, how to use himself as a gimmick without spending too much time on earning money was something he needed to discuss with Ferdinand. Fang Xingjian arrived at the hotel where he had arranged to meet up with Ferdinand and knocked on the door. When Ferdinand came out and saw Fang Xingjian, he broke into an excited smile. He shouted toward Anthony and Robert, who were behind the door, "Come out and take a look. The person you've been waiting for is finally here." In fact, Fang Xingjian had been gone for over 10 days. Although Ferdinand was still able to keep his composure, this was a great torment for Anthony and Robert. They had made up their minds to drop out of the Prefectural Academy and follow Fang Xingjian to the great western city. Once Fang Xingjian forgot about them, they would not be able to return to the Prefectural Academy and would no longer be able to receive cultivation resources from the government. They could only look for a random government department or some other influence to join. If that were to happen, their futures would truly be uncertain. Therefore, when they saw Fang Xingjian, their gazes were filled with unease and excitement. They were uneasy because they did not know what Fang Xingjian would do next and what his future would be like. They were excited because with Fang Xingjian's results and talent, he would definitely be able to make a name for himself. However, Fang Xingjian did not care about their feelings. The moment he walked in, he went straight to the point and said, "I want to earn money. Ferdinand, what are your thoughts?" "Of course, I'm 100% in favor." As he spoke, he took out a stack of documents from his room and tossed them to Fang Xingjian, saying, "I've already done my research. There are over 5,000 aristocrats in the entire Great Western City alone, and there are about 800 of them aged 8 to 15. How big of a market is this? If we were to open supplementary classes, even if each of us were to charge 5 gold per month, we'd be able to earn 4,000 gold per month. Moreover, with your status, it's impossible for us to charge 5 gold at such a low price. 5 gold is still considered cheap." Anthony was speechless. Before he had become a knight, 5 gold was already enough for him to live on for a year. Moreover, he had enough to eat, drink, and play. However, Ferdinand smiled in disdain. These are all aristocrats. They don't lack this bit of money. Moreover, what is Xingjian's current status? He's this year's regional champion, and he has an outstanding result that hasn't appeared in decades. If we were to charge only 5 gold, it would only make people doubt our standards. Anthony asked, "Then how much do you think we should charge?" "At least 20 gold. Seeing Anthony's eyes protruding out, Ferdinand said, "Don't think that it's too expensive. Xingjian has comprehended the 7th level of the Pantheon Monument's profoundness. How much is that worth? I think that everyone will fight for it, even if it's 20 gold. Putting Anthony aside, if you were to charge each of them 20 gold per month, how much money would they be able to earn?" Fang Xingjian shook his head and said, "Ferdinand, I'm not planning on personally guiding the students." Looking at Ferdinand's astonished gaze, Fang Xingjian said, "But I can write down some of my experiences in cultivation. You guys can guide the students according to what I've written. I'll write down the detailed cultivation materials for 5 sets of basic, nurturing sword techniques. You guys can just follow what I've written." Fang Xingjian had also thought about it carefully. It was definitely not possible for him to go out every day to guide the students in their cultivation. However, with his current level of sword arts and his grasp of the physical body, if he could come up with an extremely detailed set of teaching materials, he would be able to do it. Moreover, he could now write down all sorts of situations that he would encounter with each move and stance, as well as the various details of the cultivation process. This would definitely not be as effective as him personally guiding the students in their cultivation, but it would definitely be better than other teachers. As long as Ferdinand, Anthony, and Robert were to memorize the teaching materials and guide the students according to them, there should not be much of a problem. However, Ferdinand stroked his chin and said, "Xingjian, although your talent is unrivaled, if you don't guide them personally and they only cultivate according to the experiences you've summarized, this gimmick won't be as good as the previous one. Do you have any ideas?" Ferdinand licked his lips. At the mention of earning money, his brain started to churn at high speed. He said, "Unless you can make your reputation even greater, or you can just publish a book and sell it. How about that?" Chapter 265. Fame? Publish a book? That's right, fame. Xinjiang, although you're the regional champion and a genius who has solved all 7 levels of the Pantheon Monument's mysteries, your current reputation is only that of a genius and a student. Therefore, they'll be willing to fight to receive your guidance. However, if it's just a summary exchange, saying that they should cultivate according to your method, the effect will probably be much weaker. Why don't you publish a book about the regional champion's journey, biography, and cultivation insights? Many people will definitely buy it. Ferdinand smiled. Xinjiang, do you want to be an authority in sword arts? To research sword arts? Authority in sword arts? Fang Xinjiang pondered over the implications, but his eyes were brimming with confidence. Putting aside his sword arts cultivation, just the specialties of sword grandmaster, unparalleled sword intent, and the specialties from the heavenly sword imprint had allowed the highest level of his sword arts to be raised by 10 levels. Moreover, he already had the world's best sword arts talent and had cultivated over 100 sets of sword techniques. He dared to say that even a level 29 conferred knight would not be able to be an authority in sword arts before him. However, Ferdinand stared at Fang Xinjiang's eyes. When he sensed the confidence in Fang Xinjiang's eyes, he smiled. Only when you become an authority in the field of sword arts will your words be taken as the truth by others. You'll be able to sell any of your books at a sky-high price, let alone the tuition classes you'll be able to sell them. It's just like your regional academy's hops. He's an authority in sword arts in the Great Western region. Every single word he says will be studied and researched by countless swordsmen. Just by licensing the sword techniques he has created to other academies, he'll be able to earn a lot of money every year. In the entire Great Western City, those who wish to be his disciple can queue up from the East Gate to the West Gate. Hops, Fang Xinjiang thought to himself. Wasn't this the old man who had taught me the 90,000 godly demon flash? I had not expected him to be so famous. Ferdinand continued. Of course, although Xinjiang has unrivaled talent, it's not something that can be achieved easily if you wish to become an authority in sword arts. We'll still need to take things one step at a time, slowly maintaining and strengthening your reputation. If you want to research swordsmanship, the most popular and cutting-edge research in the current research direction of martial arts is to research specific martial techniques. Whether it's discovering a new synthesis formula or creating a new set of martial arts, it's enough for you to make a name for yourself. Finding a new synthesis formula meant that he would be able to test out a technique synthesis formula that had never appeared in history and was not recorded in the regional academy. Of course, the prerequisite was that the new technique synthesized was strong enough. Otherwise, even if he succeeded in synthesizing it, not many people would pay attention to it. However, this kind of thing depended too much on luck. Moreover, there were tens of thousands of types of skills. Trying to find an effective and powerful synthesis formula was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Usually, only top-notch level 29 experts would be able to deduce the fusion results based on the characteristics of 2 sets of skills. They would also have a 100% ether synchronization rate. Only then would they be able to greatly increase the efficiency and continue to explore new skills. Despite this, for experts who would need to cultivate a set of skills for half a year, or even 2 years, time was still not enough. Compared to ordinary people who would need 10 or even over 10 years to cultivate their skills to the maximum level, they were already much faster. As for creating new skills, it was even more difficult. It would only be possible if one had a very deep understanding of the physical body and ether particles. Not only must one be able to perform the skill, but one must also be able to explore the principles behind it. Fang Xinjiang might be able to casually create a few sets of nurturing techniques and training techniques, but that would be of no use. It was because too many nurturing techniques and training techniques would overlap with each other. Clearly, what people needed the most was new and powerful killing techniques. However, Fang Xinjiang stroked his chin and thought of something. Although his rebirth sword technique was also a nurturing technique, it was a combination of 100 sets of sword techniques. He did not believe that there would be anyone in this world who had managed to synthesize so many sets of nurturing sword techniques. He might not be able to report out the synthesis formula for the rebirth sword technique, but if he could refine out the specific cultivation method and report it as a self-created skill, he would be able to gain a great reputation. It was because the efficiency of the rebirth sword technique was definitely more powerful than any other set of nurturing sword techniques in Miracle World. He could not help but ponder for a moment before suddenly asking, "Oh, right. You said that after Hops created his own skills, he gave them to the other academies?" "That's right. He created his own sword technique, so it's impossible for it to be given out for free. No one would dare to spread the sword techniques of a conferred knight. However, regional academies, prefectural academies, and even national academies can purchase them from him. As long as they pay him a yearly fee, they can teach him the sword techniques he created in the academy. This fee will be maintained until the inventor dies. Do you know that the radiant light sword technique that you've been cultivating was invented by Hops? Radiant light sword technique? Fang Xingjian blinked, looked at Ferdinand, and asked, "How much does Cursed Academy pay Hops for the radiant light sword technique every year?" Ferdinand gave it some thought and said, "Our academy seems to offer a yearly fee, 200 gold a year. You can learn it however you like." 200 gold a year? Fang Xingjian calculated in his heart. There were a total of 12 academies in the Great Western region. If all of them were to purchase the Radiant Light sword technique, it would be 2,400 gold a year. Moreover, there were a total of 8 regions in the empire. With just the Radiant Light sword technique alone, Hops would be able to earn over 15,000 gold a year. And this was only because the Radiant Light sword technique was not powerful enough. Fang Xingjian believed that the fee for those sword techniques that were powerful enough would definitely be even higher. This was the first time Fang Xingjian had heard of something like this. He looked at Ferdinand and asked, "Then who's in charge of the fee for the fee?" "Of course, it's the Empire and the Knight Association. 10% of the income from the fee has to be handed over to them." Ferdinand looked at Fang Xingjian and said, "Xingjian, you're thinking of creating your own sword technique?" Fang Xingjian shook his head. "It's not that I'm thinking of it. I've already created a set of sword technique, the nurturing sword technique." When the excited Ferdinand heard that it was a nurturing sword technique, he immediately looked disappointed. Nurturing techniques were too repetitive and did not have much originality. Usually, the academy would use them for free, which meant that the creator was already dead. Who would pay for something that had similar versions everywhere? Nurturing techniques. Ferdinand shook his head and said, "Nurturing techniques probably won't be easy to sell. Very few academies would purchase new nurturing techniques. It'd be great if it was a killing technique. Even if it's not as powerful, you'd be able to sell it for a good price. Moreover, you'd be able to build up your reputation." However, Fang Xingjian smiled and said, "This nurturing technique of mine isn't bad." "Oh, right. Where can I register my newly created technique?" What a joke. The level 30 rebirth sword technique could provide 20,000 potential points every day. After all, it was a super nurturing technique that combined over 100 sets of nurturing sword techniques. Even if the level 10 rebirth sword technique could only provide a few thousand potential points, it would still be 10 or even 100 times more than ordinary nurturing techniques. It was true that he wanted to create his own killing technique. However, the synthesis formula for the Supreme Mistwind Sword plus Radiant Light Sword technique was too simple. Someone must have already discovered it. In fact, Fang Xingjian's search in the library had proven this point. The synthesis formula for his luminous heaven soaring slash had long since been discovered by someone. Ferdinand gave it some thought and said, "Actually, there's one in the regional academy. It's a great backing. It's better for you to look for a teacher from the sword arts department to help you register it. It's much more authoritative than other places." However, Ferdinand did not have much hope for Fang Xingjian's nurturing sword technique. He was still hoping that Fang Xingjian would write a book about his cultivation experience and biography. It would be able to sell quite well since the regional selection had just ended. Therefore, he asked, "Are you still going to write that book?" I'm writing it, but I'll only be writing the outline. Get someone to help me polish it up. Fang Xingjian had already made up his mind that after he returned, he would start to summarize the cultivation method for the rebirth sword technique. He would then look for a teacher to register the new technique and see if he could sell it to other academies to get the royalties. He was still very confident in his rebirth sword technique. Chapter 266. Fang Xingjian then talked to Ferdinand about writing his book and the tuition classes. He then left the hotel and headed back to the regional academy. He had too many things he needed to do from now on. On one hand, he had to refine the cultivation method for the rebirth sword technique. On the other hand, he had to cultivate all the additional 10 levels of sword techniques he had and synthesize the 90,000 godly demon flash. At the same time, he had to write the outline of his book and increase his ether synchronization rate. If he had some spare time, he would also like to take some time out to attend the lessons in the regional academy. Becoming a conferred knight seemed to be a new beginning. Not only did the things he had to do not become lesser, but they had also become more arduous. Therefore, Fang Xingjian once again returned to the sacred land and his training room. The first thing he did was to start cultivating the rebirth sword technique. He wanted to get rid of the additional 10 levels of the rebirth sword technique and reach the unprecedented level of 40. He casually picked up a wooden sword that he used for training. In that instant, countless ether particles seemed to gush out from void space, and the wooden sword exuded a mercury-like glow. It had already been strengthened into a level 19 inferior divine weapon by the heavenly sword sovereign specialty, Swordless Path. Fang Xingjian held onto the wooden sword and started to practice the rebirth sword technique. This rebirth sword technique was something that Fang Xingjian had created by combining over 100 sets of nurturing sword techniques. He had mastered almost all of the nurturing sword techniques in the world, cultivating it to every part of his body. Regardless of whether it was his muscles, bones, internal organs, or nerves, they were all being nourished by various nutrients as he circulated them. Rumbling sounds rang out incessantly from Fang Xingjian's body. It was the sound of the blood circulating in Fang Xingjian's body incessantly. It was as if a great river was surging in Fang Xingjian's body, releasing deep and muffled sounds. Fang Xingjian continued to practice the rebirth sword technique, trying to comprehend the various intricacies within it. This was especially so when he was in an environment with 100 times the ether particle density. He felt as if there were constantly sword arts theories gushing into his mind, giving him a burst of inspiration. With each swing of his sword, he seemed to gain new comprehension towards sword arts. With the support of heaven's perception, 100 times the ether particle's density, the number 1 sword arts talent, the title of genius in sword arts, sword specialist, unparalleled sword intent apex, and darkness sword sense. Fang Xingjian's sword arts practice progressed at a tremendous pace. His comprehension of the rebirth sword technique also grew increasingly deeper. Just like that, he continued to practice, eating a meal every 2 hours and then agitating his internal organs and blood. Then, he would spend the next 2 hours training the rebirth sword technique, turning the nutrients, energy, and essence into potential and storing them in his body. Fang Xingjian continued to practice. Xingjian, Fang Xingjian, and the rebirth Xingjian's sword technique translated. It's Xingjian, Fang Fang Wang, the rested Xingjian's sword. Fang 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 sword. Days passed by. After cultivating for a day, at night, Fang Xingjian could sense that the vital energy and blood in his body, which had been cultivating the rebirth sword technique for an entire day, were seething. Countless potential points were stored in his body, like a bomb that would explode at any moment, accumulating great power. Therefore, every night, he would cultivate the new 9-headed dragon sword technique a few times, converting his potential points into attributes. As his seething vital energy and blood calmed down, his body's attributes also continued to improve. Finally, after cultivating for 5 days, tirelessly and continuously for 24 hours, Fang Xingjian finally pushed the rebirth sword technique to level 40. At level 40, the rebirth sword technique had gained an extremely powerful special effect. When cultivating the rebirth sword technique, he could continuously circulate the vital energy and blood in his body to accumulate potential points. He could even allow the ether particles in his body to exchange energy, greatly increasing the efficiency of accumulating potential points. He could not just obtain nutrients from food alone. With that, the level 40 rebirth sword technique will be able to increase Fang Xingjian's potential points by 30,000 points every day. It was an increase of 1/3 compared to before. Therefore, after this period of cultivation, Fang Xingjian's 5 attributes had become Strength 83 plus 6 Agility, 192 plus 6 Reaction, 87 Endurance, 60 Flexibility, 60 right now. Fang Xingjian was starting to pursue a balance in his attributes. After transitioning into the Heavenly Sword Sovereign and becoming strong purely through his sword arts talent in the future, Fang Xingjian no longer pursued extreme attributes. Instead, he started to make up for his shortcomings one by one. After cultivating the rebirth sword technique to level 40, Fang Xingjian had also finished writing his sword arts manual. He picked up the manual and looked at the cultivation method for the rebirth sword technique. There were over 20,000 words in it, and it was much more complicated than any other nurturing sword technique manual. It was because there were too many cultivation methods for the rebirth sword technique, including the bones, flesh, tendons, meridians, vital energy, blood, and internal organs. It was far from being as simple as an ordinary nurturing sword technique. However, since he had succeeded, Fang Xingjian planned to register it and see if he could sell it. He would then get other schools to purchase it and pay the licensing fees. In any case, it was impossible for ordinary people to cultivate to level 40 like him. Selling this sword technique would not pose a threat to him at all. On the contrary, if he could get a large amount of money, he could start to cultivate the mystical prince, increase his ether synchronization rate, or even buy a level 29 divine longsword. Fang Xingjian stood up, stepped out of the door, and headed out of the sacred land. However, this time around, he was no longer like the previous time, casually taking a few steps and cutting the ground, creating sword marks. After cultivating the rebirth sword technique for a few days consecutively, not only had his potential increased and his attributes tempered, but it had also allowed him to control his physical body and strength even more skillfully and deeply. Fang Xingjian continued to move forward, and in the blink of an eye, he arrived at the gates of the sacred land. Fang Xingjian walked around the academy casually, asking people where the Sword Arts Department's office was, and then headed there. The Sword Arts Department's building was a small building with only 2 floors. Although it was called an office, the teachers of the Sword Arts Department were either in name only and were not in the academy all year round, or they had their own sword arts research team and were busy with their cultivation and research. Only a few of them would come back to do administrative work like this. However, the moment Fang Xingjian arrived at the gates of the Sword Arts Department, he saw the maid, Little Rue, who had come to inform him previously. Little Rue was sweeping the floor of the Sword Arts Department's office. When she saw Fang Xingjian, her face flushed slightly. However, it soon disappeared, and she took the initiative to walk up to Fang Xingjian, asking, "Lord Xingjian, why have you thought of coming to the Sword Arts Department's office?" Before Fang Xingjian could say anything, someone ran over from afar, shouting, "Xingjian! Xingjian!" Seeing Fang Xingjian, Zhou Xingwen quickly greeted him. Fang Xingjian had no choice but to stop and look at him, asking, "You're quite well informed?" Zhou Xingwen smiled and said, "It's all right, it's just that I have a few more friends." However, Fang Xingjian could not be bothered to chat with him and asked directly, "Why? Is Wang Tiangang willing to pay 1 million gold?" Hearing this, Zhou Xingwen's expression immediately sank, saying, "How is that possible? Moreover, I'm not here to look for you today because of this. Look at this." With that, he brought a small bag to Fang Xingjian. Fang Xingjian's nose twitched slightly, and his throat could not help but vibrate. Zhou Xingwen smiled and said, "Xingjian, I heard that you have 3 hobbies. The first is collecting sword arts, the second is cultivating sword arts, and the third is delicacies. I've specially bought some Western sea specialties for you to try. Little Rue looked curiously at the conversation between the 2 conferred knights. When she heard the words 1,000,000 gold, her eyes suddenly dilated. Even the great Western city, an ordinary commoner's house, would only cost 50 gold at most. Therefore, even 1 gold was a large sum of money to Little Rue. 1,000,000 gold was an astronomical figure. How can they be so rich? 1,000,000 gold? What could be worth so much money? Chapter 267. Zhou Xingwen smiled and opened the bag, revealing a gift box. The entire gift box was filled with cold air. He carefully opened the gift box and saw a small bowl of black granules in the middle of large ice cubes. Zhou Xingwen smiled and looked at Xiaoru, who had a curious look on her face, and introduced in a proud tone. This is the yuzu sauce made from the eggs of the ice shuttle sturgeon, a super ferocious fish in the Western Sea. The ice shuttle sturgeon was a precious fish in the West Sea, and there were only 2 places in the entire West Sea that produced them. The highest grade of yuzu sauce required more than 20 kilograms of ice shuttle sturgeon eggs, and the annual production of this yuzu sauce was only about 30 kilograms. Don't even think about eating it without a solid relationship. The black yuzu sauce in front of him was round and plump, exuding a faint golden luster. They looked like miniature black pearls. Xiaoru asked curiously, "How do you eat this?" Zhou Xingwen closed the lid and said with a smile, "Go with seafood, noodles, or even bread as a snack." The texture of the ice shuttle sturgeon yuzu sauce is the king of yuzu sauces. It's icy cold and smooth without the slightest bit of fishy taste. The taste is incomparably delicious and can be said to be the best in the world. As he spoke, he subconsciously gulped and said, "Moreover, the ice shuttle sturgeon is a level 19 ferocious beast. If the ice shuttle sturgeon yuzu sauce is consumed, it can even nourish the skin, strengthen the skin's defenses, and provide resistance to cold and heat." It's said that after eating the ice shuttle sturgeon yuzu sauce, one will never have wrinkles for the rest of their lives. Xiaoru's eyes immediately lit up when she heard this, and she stared at Yuzi and asked, "Then how much is this ice shuttle sturgeon yuzu?" Zhou Xingwen looked at Xiaoru. Originally, she wouldn't put this kind of maid in her eyes, but Xiaoru's appearance was really good. She had a pure face, an enchanting figure, and especially her bulging chest. Even the maid's uniform couldn't hide the part that was about to burst out. As long as a man saw it, he would have some thoughts, especially when she was standing next to Fang Xingjian. He wasn't sure if Fang Xingjian was interested in this maid, so he subconsciously said politely, "It's not a matter of money. Of course, if you insist on the price, the 500 grams in my hand would cost about 1,000 gold." Hearing the price of the ice shuttle sturgeon yuzu sauce, Little Rue drew in a gasp of cold air. With such a price, one could buy the best villa in the outskirts of the great Western city. However, when she thought about how this item came from a level 19 ferocious beast and how it could strengthen one's physique and improve one's skin, she felt that the price was not too surprising. But it was still too expensive for her. On the other hand, Fang Xingjian accepted the ice shuttle sturgeon yuzu sauce without standing on ceremony. For the other party to be so considerate, to take note of Fang Xingjian's movements, to research his preferences, and to even find decent ingredients for him, it was true that the other party was very sincere. Therefore, Fang Xingjian smiled and said, "The ice shuttle sturgeon yuzu sauce is not bad. How about this? We can reduce the price by 1,000 from the 1,000,000 gold." Zhou Xingwen felt that Fang Xingjian was really a miser. Not willing to reduce even a single cent, Fang Xingwen had no choice but to smile and change the topic, asking, "Xingjian, why have you come to the Sword Arts Department's building today?" Little Rue was still staring at the ice shuttle sturgeon yuzu sauce, which was worth 1,000 gold. When she heard Zhou Xingwen's question, she could not help but look toward Fang Xingjian. Now that she looked at Fang Xingjian again, she felt that he seemed to have become even more handsome. Powerful abilities, mysterious disposition, and food worth a lot of money. All of these caused Fang Xingjian to be shrouded in a halo in Little Ru's eyes. Fang Xingjian said as he walked, "I've created a set of sword technique and am here to register." Hearing that, Zhou Xingwen's eyes lit up and he asked, "What's sword technique?" "I call it the rebirth sword technique, a nurturing sword technique." Nurturing sword technique? A hint of disapproval flashed in Zhou Xingwen's eyes. If it's a killing sword technique with decent special effects, then there might be a market for it. However, the repetition rate for nurturing sword techniques is too high. Ordinary people would only be able to practice 5 or 6 sets of them. No one would keep on repeating nurturing sword techniques for no reason. Fang Xingjian did not seem to notice the disapproval in Zhou Xingwen's eyes. He just carried the yuzu sauce and left. How could ordinary people understand his nurturing sword techniques? Zhou Xingwen gave it some thought, but still followed after him. He wanted to build up a good relationship with Fang Xingjian at the same time. The sale of the rights to enter the sacred land involved several 100,000 gold coins, and he was extremely tempted. Once the deal was done, even if it was just a 3% commission, he would be able to earn over 10,000 gold coins. Moreover, Wang Tiangang had promised Zhou Xingwen that once he obtained the rights to use the sacred land, he would lend it to Zhou Xingwen for a period of time. This was even more wonderful. While fantasizing about the future, Zhou Xingwen spoke as he followed Fang Xingjian to the registration office for sword techniques. An old man was dozing off on a chair. Fang Xingjian knocked on the door and said, "I'd like to register a new sword technique." The old man rubbed his eyes, threw a glance at Fang Xingjian, and asked, "A new sword technique?" "Wait a moment. The person in charge of the registration isn't here. I'll go get him." Fang Xingjian nodded and sat down to wait. Zhou Xingwen could not help but ask, "Xingjian, did you bring the manual? Why don't you let me take a look? I might be able to gain some inspiration." Although Zhou Xingwen cultivated fist and palm techniques at the level of a conferred knight, it was not a problem for him to look at other nurturing techniques. Fang Xingjian tossed the manual to Zhou Xingwen casually, and the latter started to read it. However, with this, the disapproval in his heart deepened. It was because he realized that this rebirth sword technique was simply a hodgepodge. Basically, everything that could be included in nurturing techniques had been written in it. In his opinion, this was a sword technique that had been continuously pieced together, combining many different sword techniques together. It would be strange if it did not have a negative effect on each other. Without finishing reading, he smiled and returned the manual to Fang Xingjian. Zhou Xingwen said, "Not bad. Xingjian, you must have referenced many nurturing techniques for this sword technique." Fang Xingjian nodded and said, "I've combined the strong points of various schools, and the effects are very good. It far surpasses ordinary nurturing techniques." To Fang Xingjian, he was speaking the truth, but to Zhou Xingwen, he was boasting shamelessly. However, he could not possibly criticize Fang Xingjian to his face. He merely smiled and did not say anything, waiting to see how the teacher in charge of the registration would reprimand Fang Xingjian. About half an hour later, a middle-aged man with golden hair and a strong build like a lion walked in. He looked at Fang Xingjian and said, "You're the one who wants to register a new sword technique." "That's right." The lion-like man said, "I'm Leon, Master Hop's disciple. Have you brought the manual? Let me take a look at it first. If there are no problems, I'll find a time to submit it for you." Although he spoke casually, Zhou Xingwen had already stood up and bowed politely. It was because the other party was a senior student in the sword arts department, Leon, who was ranked 17th in the academy. He was the disciple of Hops, who had taught Fang Xingjian the 90,000 godly demon flash. Leon had been training in Hop's sword arts team for many years, and he was extremely strong in both his abilities and his theoretical level. Therefore, Fang Xingjian passed the manual to him, and Leon started reading it. Chapter 268. Leon was a member of Hop's sword arts team, and could also be considered as Hop's disciple. To be able to have such an identity meant that his sword arts level was already above that of most ordinary students. However, the reason why he was here was not because Hops had come to check it personally. Naturally, it was because Hops was very busy. For a sword arts master like Hops, he had to research countless sword arts theories, conduct countless experiments, and read countless documents every day. How could he possibly have the time to check every student's discoveries? Usually, it would be checked by the students under him, and only those who were especially outstanding would be submitted to him. In fact, other than the first time they chose to learn the 8 techniques of the Western suppression, most people would not even get to see a master like Hops even once in a few years. However, although Leon was also a member of the sword arts team, he was not as busy as Hops. He still had the time to pay attention to the outside world and naturally knew that Fang Xinjian was this year's regional champion, someone who had comprehended all 7 levels of the Pantheon Monument's profoundness. Therefore, he had patiently taken a look at the sword arts manual written by Fang Xinjian. However, after taking a look, a hint of disdain flashed in his eyes, and he came to the same conclusion as Zhou Xingwen. This was a sword technique that was pieced together and borrowed heavily from others. He made this judgment in his heart. He put on a straight face and looked at Fang Xinjian, saying, "I've received this new sword technique. In the next week or so, I'll take a good look at it and verify it with the information in the library. If there are no problems, I'll register this sword technique for you. However, I'm not sure if there will be anyone who will learn or even purchase the new sword technique." With that, he threw a glance at Fang Xinjian and subconsciously added, "However, young man, it's better to be down to earth and cultivate one step at a time. There's not much meaning to things like increasing the number of self-created sword techniques." With that, he left. Fang Xinjian was stunned for a moment. However, he was extremely confident in his rebirth sword technique, even if the examiner did not like it, as long as it was entered into the sword arts database. All the academies and some special influences in the empire would be notified. This meant that once a new technique appeared and was entered into the empire's database, it would first be seen by the headmasters of the various academies, as well as the leaders of some special departments. They would then decide if they wanted to introduce and adopt it. Fang Xinjian believed that there would definitely be people who knew what it was. However, it was impossible for him to have the time to catch people who did not know what it was and force them to prove how amazing the rebirth sword technique was. Sword arts were something that was difficult to understand. It was impossible to ask the public to understand a high-level sword technique. Sword techniques were something that was difficult to understand. One could never ask the masses to understand a high-level sword technique. Like a sun rising from the ground, streams of sword light soared into the sky, engulfing Fang Xinjian. With to be, Fang Stu Fang Wang. Sunday to be, two, to be, two, to two, as, like a two, Fang sword, of, to two, of, to was to two, to do to eng to be, two, of B. When the level 30 luminous heaven soaring slash was activated, it caused a great commotion. Almost all the other cultivators in the sacred land were alarmed. However, how could Fang Xinjian care about all this? It did not take long for him to sink into the deepest state of cultivation, pushing the luminous heaven soaring slash toward level 40. The light seemed to be getting increasingly stronger, and one could even see colorful threads rising up in the surroundings of the cultivation room. They were countless ether particles that were taking on a small form under the illumination of the light that kept on changing their frequencies. On the other side of the valley, a man with silver hair and rosy lips, who looked like a mountain elf, raised his head and looked in the direction where the light pillar had soared into the sky. He said calmly, "Radiant light, sword technique? No, it's also synthesized something else. Refracting and controlling light. Did it synthesize the supreme Mistwind sword? There shouldn't be such a person in the sacred land. Which senior martial brother has picked up a new sword technique?" Shaking his head, he did not seem to be bothered by the great commotion. Instead, He turned to look in the direction of the north. There's still one more year before the national selection. Northern Ice Region's Rellings. Southern Flame Region's Victor. And there's also the one from the Imperial Capital. Each of them is an outstanding genius, 1 in 10,000. All of them have strong foundations and are people with outstanding luck and talent. It's still going to be very difficult to get first place. Saying this, a confident smile suddenly appeared on his face. But I'll still prove to the world that only I, Xiao Tianxia, am the strongest. With that, an intense and sharp aura kept on extending out from his body. With his body as the center, the floor, walls, tables, and chairs in the surroundings started to crack and shatter. On the other side, Fang Xingjian was still immersed in his cultivation. He felt that he was getting more and more familiar with the luminous heaven-soaring slash. Streams of light moved as if they were his arms, and he could even control the frequency of the light waves, changing into various colors. After cultivating like this for 2 hours, it was finally time to eat. Withdrawing his sword, the white sword light gradually dissipated. It was as if the sun had sunk into the earth's surface, and the white world returned to normal. Fang Xingjian walked toward the box of ice shuttle sturgeon yuzu sauce. When he opened the box of yuzu sauce, a gush of cold air gushed out. Looking at the distinct pieces of yuzu sauce, which were emitting a smooth glow, Fang Xingjian suddenly felt that his mood seemed to have improved a little. The fatigue from cultivating his sword arts had also dissipated a little. Fang Xingjian carefully smeared the yuzu sauce onto the white bread. It was because there was too little nutrition, and it would waste his digestive system's energy to digest it. However, in order to go along with the yuzu sauce, he had specially found a piece of bread. With one bite, a refreshing and fresh taste exploded on Fang Xingjian's taste buds. The corners of his lips curled up slightly, and he finished the yuzu sauce bread in 2 to 3 bites. He then looked at the other ingredients and took out a big butter lobster. He smeared the delicious yuzu sauce on it, mixed it with some lemon juice and butter, and skillfully combined the freshness of the yuzu sauce with the smoothness of the lobster. Fang Xingjian was not considered gourmet. He mixed the yuzu sauce and tried out the food one by one. This time, he ate twice the amount of food he usually ate. Looking at the food reserves in the kitchen, he realized that they were almost finished. He immediately hung up a food replenishment sign outside, and there would naturally be guardian ferocious beasts or staff bringing food over. The people cultivating in the sacred land would naturally not waste their extra time on cooking. Therefore, the food here was prepared daily and then placed in the kitchen. If there were any requirements for the dishes or portion sizes, they could just leave a message in the cultivation room's kitchen. For example, Fang Xingjian requested for a meal every 2 hours, 10 dishes, and each dish must have medicinal herbs and ferocious beasts. It could be said that even without considering the environment with 100 times the ether particle density, just the food in the center of the sacred land was already worth tens of thousands of gold. After finishing the yuzu sauce, Fang Xingjian stirred up his internal organs to digest it. Then he felt a hint of cool air spreading out toward his skin, as if it was slowly strengthening his stratum corneum, increasing its toughness and toughness. He knew that this should be the effect of the ice shuttle sturgeon yuzu sauce. However, his skin was covered by the heavenly abyss annihilation armor, and it did not seem to matter how tough his skin was. After digesting the food, Fang Xingjian's expression turned solemn, and he continued his cultivation. In his free time, he would also try to write a book, recording down some of his sword arts experiences, as well as the areas that he needed to pay attention to in basic sword techniques in preparation to sell his books. Time passed by, and 2 days later, his luminous heaven soaring slash finally reached level 40, gaining the special effect of controlling the frequency of light. Just as he was continuing his cultivation, in Hop's Sword Arts Laboratory in the southeast corner of the Regional Academy, a small matter was gradually brewing. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.